Hello guys. Welcome to Pika Fiction. So in this video, we will see what if Ash become the king of all legendary Pokémon. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Unchosen Crown. The wind had teeth at this altitude. It gnawed at the seams of Ash Ketchum's parka, a relentless, whining beast that promised to scour flesh from bone. He cinched his hood tighter, his breath pluming in a white cloud that was instantly torn to shreds. Beside him, Pikachu was a small, determined ball of yellow fur, ears pinned back against the gale, his small paws digging into the icy scree with each step. Any champion worth their title should have a private helicopter, Ash yelled over the roar, his voice thin in the vast, empty air of Mount Coronet's peak. Cynthia, a few steps ahead, didn't turn. Her long blonde hair was a whip of gold against the gray sky, somehow defying the wind's fury. She was a silhouette of impossible grace, her black coat a stark slash against the snow. And miss this invigorating climb? Where's your sense of adventure, Ash? Her voice carried back to him with an effortless clarity that defied the storm, a testament to the quiet power that radiated from her like warmth from a hearth. I think I left it somewhere around the fourth blizzard, he grumbled, but there was a grin on his face. He felt it, too. The thrumming, ancient energy of the mountain. It was a place where the world felt thin, where the veil between what was and what could be was as fragile as a sheet of ice. That was why they were here. For the past week, something had been wrong. Not just bad weather, but a fundamental sickness in the air itself. Seismographs across Sinnoh were chattering like panicked teeth. Compasses spun lazily, and psychics were being admitted to hospitals with migraines that felt, in their words, like the sky was screaming. It all pointed here, to the spear pillar, the altar where the world was born. As they cleared the final ridge, the wind died. Not gradually, but as if a switch had been flipped. The sudden, ringing silence was more deafening than the gale had been. Before them lay the ruins of the ancient temple, its broken columns stark against a sky the color of a deep bruise. And in the center, hovering above the dais where the red chain had once been forged, was the source of the sickness. It looked like a flaw in reality. A shimmering, heat-hazed distortion, roughly the size of a Wailord, that bent the light around it. It wasn't a thing, but the absence of a thing. A patch of existence that had been rubbed raw. Pikachu's cheeks sparked nervously, a low, anxious crackle in the dead air. That's not a spatial rift, Cynthia said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Her Garchomp materialized beside her, its sandpapery skin bristling, its yellow eyes narrowed to slits. The land shark Pokémon let out a low growl that was pure menace. Ash's own hand went to his belt, his fingers brushing against a Pokeball. He didn't need to call anyone out yet. The wrongness hadn't become hostile. It was just waiting. It feels like it's pulling on something, Ash said, his eyes unfocused. He could feel it in his gut, a deep, resonant tug, like a phantom limb aching for something that was no longer there. As if his words were a cue, the distortion pulsed. The light around it warped violently, and a sound echoed through the silent peak. A sound that was not a sound, but a feeling. It was the grating noise of static, the stomach-lurching drop of an elevator, and the mournful cry of a dying star, all at once. It vibrated in their bones, a chord of pure, cosmic wrongness. Garchomp roared, a defiant challenge. Cynthia placed a calming hand on her Pokemon's side. Steady. We don't know what it is. The distortion pulsed again, faster this time, and the air grew thick, heavy with an ozone-like tang. Then, with a final, gut-wrenching shudder, it shattered. Not in an explosion, but an implosion. Light, sound, and even the sense of space rushed inward, collapsing into a pinprick of absolute nothingness that hung in the air for a single, silent heartbeat. From that pinprick, something new unfolded. It was not a Pokémon. It was a creature of sharp angles and impossible geometry, forged from solidified anti-energy. Its body was a chaotic lattice of obsidian-like shards that seemed to drink the light, and where a head should have been, there was only a shimmering void, a hole that looked into a starless night. It had no face, no eyes, but they could feel its attention, cold, ancient, and utterly without malice. It was the dispassionate focus of a surgeon excising a tumor. And the tumor was their reality. Before either champion could react, the world bleached white. A presence descended upon the spear pillar that dwarfed the mountain itself. It was a power so immense, so foundational, that it felt less like an arrival and more like a law of physics reasserting itself. The very stones hummed with its name. Arceus. The original one manifested between the two humans and the creature of void. It was not the solid, physical form Ash had seen before. This was a being of pure, solidified light, its golden wheel spinning with the condensed power of 1,000 supernovas. Its voice was not spoken, but simply known, imprinted directly onto their minds. Less than this world is not for you. You are an error. You will be unmade, greater than. The void creature, the fragment, as some primal part of Ash's mind labeled it, did not answer. It simply acted. One of its jagged limbs shot forward, impossibly fast. It wasn't an attack of energy or physical force. It was a lance of pure negation. Arceus erected a barrier of golden light, a shield that could have turned back the combined force of Dialga and Palkia. But the lance of nothingness didn't break it. It didn't need to. It simply erased it. The point of contact vanished from existence. The shield, now with a perfect hole in its center, wavered and collapsed. The lance struck Arceus in the flank. There was no sound of impact. There was only a sickening silence where sound should have been. The light of the original one flickered, dimmed. Where the void shard had touched it, its form was gone. Not wounded, not bleeding, but simply deleted from the canvas of reality. Cynthia's gasp was sharp and horrified. Garchomp, acting on pure protective instinct, launched itself forward, jaws agape, dragon claw igniting with emerald energy. Garchomp. No! Cynthia screamed. The fragment turned its void gaze on the incoming Pokémon. Another shard, smaller this time, flickered from its body and met Garchomp midair. The land shark's roar was cut short as the shard of nothingness grazed its shoulder. The dragon claw sputtered and died. Garchomp crashed to the ground, writhing not in pain, but in a horrifying, unnatural lethargy, as if its very life force was being unraveled. That's enough. Ash roared, the fear in his gut transmuting into familiar, white-hot anger. He flung a Pokeball. Infernape, I need you. The fire-fighting monkey appeared in a flash of red light, its crown of flame blazing with defiance. It saw its fallen comrade, Garchomp. It saw the wounded god. Its eyes locked onto the creature of void, and it let out a battle cry that was pure, unadulterated fury. Flare Blitz. Full power. Ash commanded. Infernape became a comet of roaring flame, hurtling across the ruined stone. The sheer heat of its charge melted the surface of the ancient dais, leaving a trail of glowing slag. The fragment remained motionless, a silent, black hole in the world. It raised a single, bladed limb. Just as Infernape was about to connect, Ash saw it. The air around the fragment's limb was not heating up, it was growing colder. The moisture in the atmosphere was flash freezing into crystalline dust. Dodge it. Pull up. The command came too late. Infernape, a creature of pure, vibrant energy, collided with the limb of pure, absolute zero. The explosion was not of fire, but of its sudden and total absence. The flare blitz was extinguished as if it had never been lit. The flames on Infernape's head sputtered and died, and the Pokémon was flung backward, crashing into a stone pillar. It didn't have a single burn mark. It was shivering violently, covered in a thin layer of frost, its inner fire nearly snuffed out. This wasn't a battle. It was a lesson in futility. They were trying to punch a hole in the ocean. Arceus, its form flickering like a dying candle, tried to retaliate. It gathered its power, the 17 type plates flaring to life on its golden wheel. A beam of concentrated creation energy, a light that contained the essence of every type, every element, every fundamental force of their universe, shot towards the fragment. It was the ultimate attack, judgment. The fragment met the beam with its own void. For a moment, the two forces met, creation and uncreation, existence and non-existence. The peak of Mount Coronet groaned under the strain. The sky cracked, revealing glimpses of other dimensions, the swirling chaos of the distortion world, the ordered blue of Palkia's spatial realm. Then, with a sound like tearing fabric, the fragment's void began to consume the judgment beam. It was eating the light, swallowing the very power of its creator. Less than the flaws in the design, greater than a thought, cold and sterile, echoed not from Arceus, but from the fragment itself. Less than chaos, noise, pain. It all must be silenced. Greater than. The void surged forward, engulfing the beam of light and striking Arceus a second time, this time in the center of its golden wheel. This time, the damage was catastrophic. A web of black, silent cracks spread across the original one's body. The light did not just dim, it began to break apart. A sound of cosmic heartbreak echoed through every mind on the planet, a psychic scream of a dying god that sent flocks of birds scattering from trees 1,000 miles away. Arceus was shattering. Its physical form, a construct of divine will, was dissolving. But as the form of Arceus crumbled away into motes of fading light, something was left behind. Where the center of the golden wheel had been, a sphere of pure, incandescent energy now hung in the air. It was no bigger than a basketball, but it contained the weight of a universe. It was a blinding, iridescent white, shot through with veins of every color imaginable. It was the source code. The Alpha and the Omega. The nexus of origin. The very thing that powered Arceus, now raw, untethered, and exposed. The fragment, its duty almost complete, turned its full attention to the nexus. It lunged, its jagged form contracting like a spear, ready to deliver the final, silencing blow that would unmake their reality. Cynthia was frozen, her mind struggling to comprehend the scale of the horror before her. Garchomp and Infernape were down. A god was dead. The world was about to end. Ash wasn't thinking. He was moving. There was no strategy, no grand plan. There was only a single, inviolable instinct that had governed his entire life. You protect others. You stand in the way. He ran, his legs pumping, the thin air burning in his lungs. He slid across the icy stone, positioning his own body between the charging spear of nothingness and the glowing heart of his world. He threw his arms out, a futile, human shield against the inevitable. Pikachu, sensing his trainer's intent, leapt from his shoulder, landing in front of Ash, cheeks blazing with a defiant, suicidal burst of lightning. Pikachu, get back, Ash yelled, but it was too late. The fragment was upon them. And then the Nexus acted. It seemed to recognize the selflessness of the act, the purity of the sacrifice. Or perhaps it simply craved a vessel, an anchor to prevent its own dissipation. As the void creature's tip came within inches of Pikachu, the Nexus of Origin pulsed once, violently. It didn't attack the fragment, it moved towards Ash. It passed through Pikachu without harming him, a wave of pure, benevolent power that made the little mouse's fur stand on end, and then it hit Ash. Agony. It was not pain. Pain was a limited, biological concept. This was the dissolution of self. His mind, his very soul, was ripped open and connected to everything. He felt the slow, tectonic grind of the continents. He heard the whisper of every blade of grass growing in the fields of Johto. He felt the crushing pressure in the deepest trenches of Hoenn's oceans and the searing heat in the heart of Cinnabar's volcano. And the voices. Less than the current's shift, a new pressure, greater than the ancient, slow thought of Kyogre. Less than the sun, the land, it burns, greater than Groudon's primal consciousness. Less than time flows, it bends, a stone has been thrown into the river, greater than the serene, cold logic of Dialga. Less than space warps, the wound, it closes, greater than Palkia's reply. Less than silence. At last. Silence, greater than a new, terrifying thought from the fragment, now recoiling as if burned. He felt the dreams of every sleeping child in Kanto, the ambition of every trainer, the quiet contentment of every Pokémon living in harmony with its family. He felt the cold, calculating rage of Mewtwo in his distant cave, the playful curiosity of Mew as it drifted through the ozone layer, the sorrow of the lonely Regigigas, sleeping beneath the snow. 1,000 radios. A million. A billion. All playing at once, directly in the center of his skull. The sensory overload was a physical force, a tidal wave of information that threatened to tear his sanity to pieces, to shred his very identity until nothing was left but a screaming, overloaded nerve ending. He felt his own consciousness, the thing that was Ash Ketchum, dissolving into the cosmic sea. The fragment, repulsed by the newly stabilized Nexus, the thing it had sought to destroy now anchored within a living vessel, hesitated. It saw not a human boy, but a new, infinitely more complex Godeling. An error it still needed to correct. It gathered itself for another strike. Ash, or what was left of him, was on his knees, head clutched in his hands, a raw, guttural scream tearing from his throat. But through the agony, through the cacophony of a billion voices, he felt one thing with perfect clarity. A threat. A threat to Pikachu. A threat to Cynthia. A threat to the world whose every thought and feeling was now pouring through him like a flood. And the flood had to go somewhere. He didn't know what he was doing. He acted on an instinct that was no longer entirely his own. It was the instinct of a creator, a guardian, a fundamental law. He raised a trembling hand. He didn't shout a command. He didn't call an attack. He simply willed it. He willed for the threat to be gone. He willed for his friends to be safe. From the air in front of his outstretched hand, reality itself seemed to crystallize. A barrier of pure, iridescent energy shimmered into existence. It was not of a single type, but of all types at once. It held the unyielding strength of steel, the fluid grace of water, the temporal stability of psychic, and the spatial integrity of dragon. It was a shield forged from the thoughts of Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, given form by the will of the Nexus now burning in his chest. The fragment's spear of negation struck the barrier. This time, it did not erase it. This time, it was met with an equal and opposite force. The barrier did not just block the attack. It reasserted reality. It was an absolute statement. You do not belong here. The resulting detonation was silent but absolute. The fragment, the creature that had wounded a god and defeated two champions' aces without effort, was not just destroyed. It was unwritten from the script of existence. One moment it was there, a blot of wrongness against the sky. The next, it was gone, and the clean, cold mountain air rushed in to fill the space where it had been. The barrier dissolved. The sudden quiet was as profound as the one that had preceded the battle. Ash collapsed onto the stone, his body spasming. The divine noise in his head receded from a soul-shattering tsunami to a roaring, agonizing flood, but it was survivable. His eyes, when he opened them, were no longer their familiar, warm brown. They were glowing with an inner light, a swirling galaxy of whites, golds, and blues. Cynthia could only stare, her hand half covering her mouth. She hadn't moved. She had witnessed a boy she considered a friend, a rival, become something else. The power that had radiated from him wasn't the fierce energy of a Pokémon. It was serene, absolute, and utterly terrifying. It felt like standing next to the mountain itself. She took a half step back, an involuntary motion born of primal fear. Her Garchomp, slowly recovering, let out a low, questioning whine, looking not at where the enemy had been, but at Ash. Pikachu was the first to move. He scrambled over to Ash, ignoring the residual aura of power that made the air crackle. He nudged his trainer's face with his nose, chirping in that worried tone Ash knew better than his own heartbeat. Ash's glowing eyes didn't seem to recognize him. He was lost, drowning in the divine sea. Pikachu did the only thing he could think of to do. He pressed his cheek against Ash's and let loose a familiar, grounding jolt of electricity. Thundershock. It wasn't powerful, it was just enough to sting, but for Ash, it was an anchor in the storm. The familiar sensation, the specific feeling of his oldest friend's power, cut through the cosmic noise. It was a voice he knew, a signal in the static. He focused on it, holding onto it like a drowning man clutching a piece of driftwood. The light in his eyes flickered, receded, and finally condensed back into his familiar brown pupils. The overwhelming presence that had dwarfed the mountain shrank, pulling back inside him, contained but not gone. He blinked, his vision swimming. The roaring in his head subsided to a constant, maddening hum. Pikachu, he rasped, his throat raw. Pikachu chirped again, a sound of immense relief, and nuzzled him fiercely. Ash pushed himself into a sitting position, his entire body feeling like a live wire. He saw Cynthia's expression, the shock, the awe, and the undisguised fear. He looked at his own hands, half expecting them to be glowing. They were just his hands. But he could feel it. The power was still there, a second heartbeat inside his own, a universe coiled in his solar plexus. Deep within a sterile, subterranean monitoring station hundreds of miles away, screens flashed from green to blood red. Alarms, silent and encrypted, blared across the command center. Technicians in crisp, dark uniforms scrambled, their voices a low, urgent murmur. At the center of the room, a man in a stark, black suit watched the main screen, his face illuminated by the cascading data. The screen showed a topographical map of Sinnoh, with a single, pulsing epicenter at the peak of Mount Coronet. "Report," the man said, his voice calm and cold. A technician, her face pale, turned from her console. "Director Kalen," Sir, the energy signature is off the scale. It eclipsed the readings from the Dialga-Palkia event. For a moment, it registered as a value our systems don't have a classification for. Kalen's gray eyes remained fixed on the screen. He took a sip of his tea, the picture of unnerving calm. Define, unclassified. It registered as origin, the technician whispered, as if saying the word aloud was blasphemy. All known energy types simultaneously, in a stable, unified state. And it's localize. Contained. The source is no longer radiating outward. Kalen set his teacup down with a soft, deliberate click. He saw the readings. A cataclysmic, reality-level energy event, followed by a sudden, impossible stabilization. It was as if a star had gone supernova and then decided to fold itself neatly back into a shoebox. Such a thing was not natural. It required a container. A will. We have our asset, Kalen said, his voice barely above a whisper. He turned to his communications officer. Scramble the Ravens. Elite teams 1 through 4. Their target is the epicenter. Mission is containment of the source, which we will designate Asset Alpha 1. He paused, his gaze hardening. Lethal force is not authorized, but the mission is absolute. Contain the asset. By any means necessary. Back on the freezing peak of Mount Coronet, Ash finally got to his feet, swaying. The world felt fragile, like he could break it if he moved too fast. The constant hum in his head was already giving him a splitting headache. Cynthia, what just happened? He asked, his voice shaking. Before she could answer, a new sound cut through the thin mountain air. It was a rhythmic, mechanical chopping, growing steadily louder. A low, predatory whirring that was all too familiar. Ash looked up, his new, heightened senses tracing the sound to its source long before he could see it. 4 of them. Black, sleek, military-grade helicopters, rising over the surrounding peaks like birds of prey, their silhouettes stark against the bruised twilight sky. They were closing in fast. The Aegis Accord had arrived. Chapter 1 end. Chapter 2, The Weight of Sovereignty. The rhythmic thumping of the helicopters was the sound of a closing fist. 4 of them, the Aegis Ravens, apex predators of the sky, their matte black fuselages drinking the last of the bruised twilight. They didn't circle. They moved with the coordinated precision of a predator cutting off all paths of escape, converging on the spear pillar from 4 cardinal points. We have to move. Now, Cynthia's voice was sharp, cutting through Ash's daze. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by the flinty resolve of a champion. This was a battle, and a battlefield was something she understood. Ash scrambled to his feet, his body a mess of contradictions. He was exhausted, his mind scraped raw by the psychic onslaught of the Nexus, yet a deep, humming well of energy thrummed beneath his skin. He felt like he could run for a week or collapse into dust. Pikachu was already on his shoulder, a low growl rumbling in his chest, his cheeks letting off nervous, dancing sparks. Down the north face, Cynthia commanded, pointing toward a treacherous, scree-covered slope that offered the most direct route below the cloud line. Garchomp can clear a path. We need to break their line of sight. Her Garchomp, still favoring the shoulder that had been grazed by the void creature's attack, moved to her side, its loyalty absolute. Infernape, too, was back on its feet, the fire on its head burning low but steady, its eyes fixed on the approaching aircraft. But it was too late. The lead Raven was already swooping in, its side door sliding open to reveal a team of operatives clad in graphite gray tactical gear. They weren't soldiers. They were sleeker, more specialized. The rifles they carried didn't have conventional barrels but instead terminated in complex, gyroscopic emitters that hummed with a contained, hungry energy. A voice, amplified and chillingly calm, boomed from the helicopter's external speakers, washing over the ancient ruins. Cease all movement. You are in a restricted quarantine zone established by the International Aegis Accord. Power down all Pokémon. The energy source designated Asset Alpha 1 is to surrender for immediate containment. Asset Alpha 1. The term was so sterile, so dehumanizing, it took Ash a moment to realize they were talking about him. They're not here to talk, Ash said, stating the obvious. The hum in his head spiked in response to the perceived threat, the billion voices whispering warnings. I am Champion Cynthia of the Sinnoh Elite Four, she projected her voice, a shield of authority against their faceless commands. You are operating illegally in my jurisdiction. Identify yourselves and your commander. The only answer was the whine of repulsor lifts as the operatives descended, their boots landing on the sacred stone with soft, practiced thuds. There were 6 of them, moving in a fluid, diamond formation. The one in the lead, distinguished by a subtle silver trim on his helmet, held up a hand, and the team stopped. He raised his rifle, its emitter glowing with a faint, violet light. "Our authority supersedes regional leagues," the amplified voice stated, presumably from the commander still in the chopper. "Acid Alpha 1, this is your final warning. Comply, or we will enforce compliance." Ash stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace, though every nerve screamed at him to run. "Look, I don't know what you think I am, but there was a creature, it attacked Arceus, I just tried to help." The lead operative on the ground didn't respond. His helmeted gaze was fixed on Ash, an unblinking cyclopean eye. Ash could feel the man's focus, a pinprick of cold intent amidst the storm in his own mind. He could also feel the man's Pokémon, a Metagross, held in reserve, its powerful, quad-core mind a beacon of cold logic. The Aegis operative wasn't a mere soldier, he was a powerful trainer. "Your help has resulted in a planetary-level energy event," the voice from above replied, a tone of strained patience entering its metallic rasp. "We're here to prevent an extinction-level aftershock. Now, stand down." Cynthia moved to stand beside Ash, her own expression a mask of cold fury. "You will address him by his name. He is Ash Ketchum, a citizen of the Kanto region, and he is under my protection." The commander in the Raven seemed to consider this for a moment. The champion's protection is noted, and irrelevant. Fire the dampener. Low yield. The lead operative on the ground didn't hesitate. He adjusted his rifle's aim, not at Ash, but at the space just in front of him. With a high-frequency thrum that vibrated in Ash's teeth, the rifle discharged a shimmering, translucent ring of energy. It wasn't an attack meant to harm. It was a wave of pure disruption. Ash felt the nexus inside him recoil, a painful, nauseating lurch, as if his very soul was being squeezed. The air around the ring warped, and the humming in his head became a deafening shriek. He was the target. But Pikachu was faster. With a defiant cry of, "Pikachu!" the little mouse leapt from Ash's shoulder, a yellow blur of absolute loyalty. He landed directly in the path of the incoming energy ring, his body crackling with a furious torrent of his own electricity. He fired a thunderbolt, not as an attack, but as a shield. The two forces met. For a split second, Pikachu's raw, natural electricity held against the synthetic disruption field. The air smelled of burnt sugar and ozone. But the dampener was designed to destabilize far greater powers. The thunderbolt wavered, was consumed, and the ring collapsed inward, engulfing Pikachu in its violet light. Pikachu's cry was cut short. His electricity died, and he fell to the stone with a soft, limp thud, his body shrouded in a faint, shimmering aura that seemed to be actively suppressing his life force. He was alive, but neutralized. Powerless. Time stopped. The roaring flood in Ash's mind, the billion voices, the tectonic plates, the whispering grass, vanished. It was all consumed by a single, perfect, and absolute silence. In that silence, a new feeling bloomed, a cold, dark fury that was not his own. It was the anger of the Nexus, the rage of a fundamental force witnessing a violation. The Protector had been harmed. The bond had been threatened. A line had been crossed. The Aegis operative, seeing Pikachu fall, began to adjust his aim toward the true target. He never got the chance. The ground beneath his feet shook. Not an earthquake, but a deep, resonant thrum, as if a titan had cleared its throat deep in the planet's core. The air temperature plummeted, and frost began to creep across the ancient stones, spreading from Ash's feet in a perfect, crystalline circle. The operatives stumbled, their mag boots struggling to find purchase on the suddenly slick surface. Ash didn't look up. His gaze was fixed on Pikachu's still form. But he felt it. He felt them. Deep within the mountain. Asleep. Waiting. The Nexus inside him, driven by his silent, protective rage, reached out. It wasn't a call. It wasn't a request. It was a command, woven from the fabric of reality itself. A single, silent word spoken not with a voice, but with the will of a king. Awaken. From the north, the very mountain seemed to groan as the cliff face sheared away. Boulders and earth cascaded down the slope, but what emerged was not rock. It was a golem of living stone, broad-shouldered and immense, its body a mosaic of ancient granite. 6 glowing red dots ignited in its face, forming a patient, unblinking pattern. Regirock had answered, tearing itself from the heart of the mountain. From the south, the glacier that clung to the shadowed face of the peak cracked with a sound like a thunderclap. A pillar of ancient, impossibly dense ice surged upward, carving a trench through the snow. It molded itself, compacted by a will older than the first winter, into a crystalline humanoid form. Light refracted through its body, casting cold, blue patterns on the snow. 7 yellow eyes blinked open. Regice had come. And from below, directly beneath the dais of the spear pillar, the ground buckled. Magma-forged steel, buried for eons, tore through the sacred stone. A shape of dark, rusted metal, impossibly dense and radiating a cold, industrial finality, rose from the breach. Its form was spindly yet powerful, its arms ending in heavy, blunt fists. Its pattern of 7 red eyes glowed with the soft light of a dying forge. Registeel had risen. The 3 legendary titans materialized around the spear pillar, moving with a slow, inexorable purpose. They took up positions between Ash and the Aegis operatives, forming an impenetrable, silent wall of stone, ice, and steel. They didn't roar or attack. They simply existed. Their combined presence was a statement of absolute, geological power that made the advanced technology of the Aegis Accord feel like children's toys. The operatives were frozen, their professional composure shattered. The commander's voice over the comm was a choked, incredulous squawk. What in the, all teams, status report, are those? Ash finally looked up. He saw the titans. He saw the terrified soldiers. And the cold rage inside him was instantly doused by a wave of sheer, nauseating horror. He hadn't called them. He hadn't thought to summon them. He had just felt rage, and the world had reshaped itself to his emotion. It was worse than the voices. The voices were a storm he had to endure. This was a storm he had created. He could feel their minds, now linked to his. They weren't the chaotic chatter of 1,000 different beings. They were slow, simple, and ancient. Less than command. Greater than the thought from Regirock, solid and unquestioning. Less than order. Greater than the thought from Regice, cold and clear. Less than directive. Greater than the thought from Registeel, logical and final. They weren't allies. They were weapons, waiting for him to aim them. The realization made him sick to his stomach. This wasn't his power. This was a violation. No, he whispered, stumbling backward. I didn't. Cynthia stared at him, then at the titans, her eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying understanding. She saw the horror on Ash's face and knew this wasn't an act of conscious power. It was something far more dangerous, an involuntary reflex. She seized the moment. The Aegis forces were in disarray, their formation broken, their attention entirely on the impossible wall of legendary Pokémon that had just materialized from thin air. Now, Ash, she yelled, returning her dazed Infernape to its ball. Garchomp, Sandstorm. Garchomp roared, stomping its foot. A swirling vortex of sand and ice crystals erupted from the ground, engulfing the peak in a blinding, scouring blizzard. The operatives cried out in alarm, their helmet visors instantly frosting over. The helicopter's engines whined as their turbines ingested the particulate matter. Get Pikachu! Cynthia ordered. Ash scooped up his unconscious partner, cradling him close. The faint, suppressive aura around Pikachu felt like poison. He looked at the 3 golems, a silent, obedient army awaiting his command. The temptation to just think the word, crush, was a seductive, horrifying whisper in the back of his mind. He recoiled from it, from himself. Stand down, he said, his voice raw. But the words came out wrong. They weren't a request. They were laced with the unnatural, resonant authority of the Nexus. They carried a weight, a compulsion. The 3 titans, who would have ignored a command from any other being on the planet, obeyed instantly. With the same slow, deliberate grace with which they had appeared, they began to recede. Regirock sank back into the stony ground. Regice dissolved into a shower of ice crystals that flowed back toward the glacier, and Registeel descended into the breach it had created, the stone sealing itself over the top. In seconds, they were gone, as if they had never been there at all. The only evidence was the raw, broken earth and the terrified silence of the Aegis operatives. Let's go. Cynthia grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the northern slope, using the chaos of the sandstorm as their cover. They scrambled down the treacherous path, sliding on loose scree and icy patches, the storm and the mountain itself shielding them from view. They didn't stop running until they were miles down the mountain, hidden deep within a pine forest, the sounds of the helicopters a faint, frustrated buzz far above them. Ash gently laid Pikachu on a patch of soft moss. The suppressive aura was fading, but Pikachu was still unconscious. Ash sank to his knees, his head in his hands. He wasn't a trainer, he wasn't a champion. He was a monster who could enslave gods with a stray thought. "I made them come, Cynthia," he said, his voice cracking. "I didn't even think about it. I was just angry, and they just appeared. I felt their minds. They were waiting for me to tell them what to do." He shuddered, wrapping his arms around himself. It felt disgusting. Cynthia knelt beside him, her expression a complex mixture of concern and awe. She put a hand on his shoulder. It was trembling. "Ash, that power, Arceus's power, it's a part of you now. You can't fight it. You have to learn to control it." "Control it?" He shot back, his voice rising with a frantic edge. "How do you control something that summons an army when you get angry? What happens if I get sad? Does Kyogre flood a city? If I get annoyed, does Groudon cause an earthquake? I can't live like this." "You have to," she said, her voice firm, pulling him back from the edge of panic, "because they won't stop hunting you." As if on cue, a global news alert pinged on Cynthia's Pokésh. She activated the screen, and a news anchor's grim face appeared. Repeating our top story. The Aegis Accord, an international coalition tasked with managing global-level threats, has declared a planetary state of emergency. This comes after what is being called the Spear Pillar Incident, a massive, unclassified energy event that has destabilized weather and magnetic patterns across the globe. In a press conference moments ago, Aegis Director Kalen addressed the world. The feed cut to a press hall. At a podium stood the man from the monitoring station, Director Kalen. He was handsome, with sharp, intelligent eyes and silvering hair at his temples. He radiated an aura of calm competence and absolute control. "My fellow citizens of this world," Kalen began, his voice a smooth, reassuring baritone. "Today, we faced a phenomenon unlike any in recorded history. Our preliminary analysis indicates the emergence of a new form of energy, one with the theoretical potential to alter the fabric of our reality. We have designated this a Type Omega event." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Our brave operatives have confirmed that this energy is not a random, natural occurrence. It has a localized source. A living, mobile nexus. While our investigation is ongoing, I want to be clear. This is not a Pokémon, nor is it human. It is, for all intents and purposes, a walking natural disaster. An entity of this power, left unchecked, poses a threat to every man, woman, and child on this planet." He leaned forward, his expression grave. "The Aegis Accord's mandate is simple: to protect humanity. We will contain this threat. We will study it. And we will neutralize it if we must. I urge all citizens to report any unusual atmospheric or Pokémon activity. Do not approach the source. Do not attempt to engage it. The acid is considered unstable and unpredictably dangerous. We will handle this. The world will be made safe again." The broadcast ended. Ash stared at the blank screen, his blood running cold. Kalen had done it in a single, masterful speech. He hadn't named him. He hadn't shown his face. He had simply painted a target on his back for the entire world, framing him not as a person, but as a plague. He was Acid Alpha 1. A Type Omega energy source. A thing to be feared and hunted. Far away, in the tranquil, sun-drenched canals of Alto Mare, the sacred waters of the Sol Dew began to shimmer with a light that was not a light. It was a subtle grayness, a patch of water where the sun's reflection seemed duller. A cold spot formed, undetectable to any thermometer, but felt as a profound, creeping sadness by the two guardians of the city. Latios and Latios, soaring high above their home, felt a sudden, inexplicable shiver of wrongness, a faint, discordant note in the psychic song of their city. A new fragment of the silencer was beginning to take root, drawn to the ancient, emotional power of the Eon Pokémon. The cosmic war was not over. For Ash Ketchum, it was just beginning on a second front, even as he was now a fugitive in a world he had just saved. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The psychic anchor. The world had become a cage. For 3 days, they had lived in the shadows, moving only at night, sticking to the forgotten paths and whispering forests of Sinnoh. Every town was a threat, every stranger a potential enemy. Kalen's words had poisoned the well. Now, every flickering light in the sky was a possible Aegis chopper, every Pokegear conversation a potential report of their location. Ash Ketchum was no longer a person. He was a rumor. A ghost story whispered by frightened travelers. For Ash, the real prison was inside his own skull. The roaring flood of a billion voices had subsided, but the hum remained. A constant, maddening symphony of divine thought. It was the background radiation of his new existence. He heard the slow, dreaming thoughts of the sleeping Snorlax blocking Route 12. He felt the territorial anger of a Tyranitar in the mountains of Johto. He could sense the precise, crystalline patterns of snowflakes forming in the upper atmosphere. Sleep offered no escape. It was a gateway to 1,000 other consciousnesses. He'd jolt awake in a cold sweat, his mind filled with the memory of soaring over Hoenn on Latios's back or the crushing, claustrophobic pressure of being buried deep within the earth like Groudon. He was losing himself, the edges of Ash Ketchum, becoming frayed and indistinct. His power flared with his frayed nerves. A moment of frustration caused the stream they were drinking from to briefly boil. A nightmare made the trees around their camp grow a foot in a single night, their branches twisting into agonized shapes. He was becoming the unstable, walking disaster Kalen had described. Cynthia watched him with a growing, helpless concern. She saw the dark circles under his eyes, the way he'd flinch at the sound of a rustling leaf as if it were a psychic shout. He was deteriorating. She had done her best, using her own formidable willpower and the calming presence of her Pokémon to keep him grounded, but she was a warrior, not a healer. She was trying to contain a supernova with a bucket of water. On the third night, as they huddled by a smokeless, heatless fire created by her Lucario's aura, she made a decision. "This can't continue," she said, her voice soft but firm in the twilight. "You're coming apart, Ash." Ash didn't look up from staring at Pikachu, who was curled in his lap, sleeping a fitful, worried sleep. "I know." The admission was a hollow, dead thing. "The problem isn't just the power," Cynthia continued, thinking aloud. "It's the input. You've become a psychic antenna for the entire planet. You need someone who can teach you how to tune the signal. Or at least build a shield against it." "And who can do that?" Ash asked, a bitter, hopeless edge to his voice. "There's no instruction manual for being a walking god." "No," Cynthia agreed. "But there are people who understand the mind. People who can communicate without words." Her eyes, gray and sharp as a winter sky, met his. "We're going to the battle frontier." Ash's head snapped up. "What?" "Cynthia, the frontier is one of the most high-profile Pokémon facilities in the world. The Aegis Accord will be watching it." "They will," she conceded. "But they'll be watching for a massive energy signature. For a god. They won't be looking for two trainers traveling on foot. And the person we need to see, she's worth the risk. Her name is Annabelle." The name sparked a flicker of recognition in Ash. The Salon Maiden. The girl with the quiet voice and the unnerving, gentle eyes, who spoke to her Pokémon without ever opening her mouth. A powerful psychic. "She understands the link between a trainer's heart and a Pokémon's mind better than anyone I've ever met," Cynthia explained. "If anyone in this world can look inside your head and not be turned to dust, it's her. She is our best and only chance." The hope was a dangerous, fragile thing, but it was the first real hope Ash had felt in days. The thought of a moment's silence, of his own mind being his own again, was a paradise he would risk anything to reach. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay. We go to the frontier." It took them another 2 days of grueling travel. They skirted the edges of Hearthome City, using the urban light pollution to mask their movements, and stowed away on a cargo train headed south. The constant psychic noise of the city was a unique form of torture for Ash, a dense, overlapping mesh of a million anxious, hurried human thoughts that left him dizzy and nauseous. By the time they disembarked near the coast where the battle tower loomed like a modern-day colossus, he was pale and swaying on his feet. The area was eerily quiet. Too quiet. There were no eager trainers lining up for a challenge, no bustling crowds. A sterile, official-looking perimeter had been established around the base of the tower, manned by guards in the same graphite-gray uniforms as the operatives from the mountain, Aegis. "They're already here," Cynthia breathed, pulling Ash behind a large, manicured hedge. "They must have locked the whole facility down." Ash focused, Pushing through the headache, he let the nexus inside him listen. He didn't hear the thoughts of the guards. Their minds were disciplined, shielded. But he could feel their intent. It was a net, closing not around him, but around someone inside the tower. He could also feel the Pokémon within. Most were calm, but a handful were agitated, distressed. An Espeon, its psychic jewel pulsing with anxiety. An Alakazam, its hyper-intelligent mind a fortress of controlled worry. And a woman's mind, a calm, clear pool of psychic energy that was nonetheless braced for a fight. Annabelle. They're not waiting, Ash said, his voice grim. They're trying to take her. Her psychic abilities, Cynthia realized with a jolt. Kalen isn't just hunting you. He's acquiring assets. He wants to use her to track you, or control you. The thought of them putting their hands on someone to use as a weapon against him reignited the cold fury from the mountain. The air around him shimmered. Pikachu's fur stood on end. Ash, control it, Cynthia warned, her hand on his arm. He took a deep breath, fighting the surge. He couldn't afford to lose control here. He couldn't be a god. He had to be a trainer. There's a service entrance on the west side, he said, his memory of the facility surprisingly clear. For maintenance and supplies. They'll be focused on the main entrance. They moved like shadows, using the ornate landscaping as cover. The service entrance was, as he'd guessed, unguarded. A simple lock was no match for the claws of Cynthia's Weavile, and a moment later they were inside, the cool, sterile air of the battle tower a welcome relief. The tension inside was palpable. They followed the psychic distress signals up a flight of stairs and down a long, polished corridor that led to the main battle floor. Peeking around the corner, they saw the scene. Annabelle stood in the center of the vast, empty arena. She was older than Ash remembered, perhaps 20 now, her lilac hair cut in the same neat style, her expression calm but unyielding. She was flanked by her Espeon and Alakazam, both out of their Pokeballs, their stances protective. Facing her were 3 Aegis operatives, not in tactical gear, but in sharp, corporate-looking suits that did little to hide their athletic builds. The man in the lead held a datapad, his smile professionally pleasant but utterly devoid of warmth. A tremendous opportunity, Salon Maiden, the man was saying. The Aegis Accord requires specialists of your unique caliber. Your work would be vital to global security. The compensation, of course, would be astronomical. My work is here, Annabelle replied, her voice soft but resonant. My duty is to the trainers who come to challenge the frontier and deepen their bonds with their Pokémon. I am not a weapon, and my partners are not tools. Her Espeon let out a low hiss, the gem on its forehead glowing faintly. I'm afraid you misunderstand. The man's smile tightened. This is not a request. Director Kalen feels your abilities are too significant to be wasted on children's games. We have been authorized to acquire your cooperation. He gestured, and the other 2 agents took a step forward, their hands reaching inside their jackets. That was when Ash stepped out from behind the corridor. His presence was not a sound or a sight, but a psychic detonation. The moment he entered the arena, the controlled, tense atmosphere shattered. For Annabelle, a gifted psychic, it was like a tidal wave of pure, unfiltered mental energy crashing over her. It was the storm Ash lived with every second of every day. The voice of the planet. The thoughts of gods. The dreams of humanity. It was a force that should have shattered her mind, a Niagara Falls of consciousness that she was utterly unprepared for. The Aegis agents stumbled back, clutching their heads, their own latent psychic sensitivities screaming in agony. Their shielded minds were no defense against a power of this magnitude. Annabelle cried out, dropping to one knee. Her Espeon and Alakazam created a barrier of shimmering pink energy around her, but it was like trying to stop a tsunami with a pane of glass. It buckled and cracked under the sheer, passive pressure of Ash's presence. But through the overwhelming, terrifying storm, Annabelle sensed something no one else could. Deep in the heart of the hurricane, there was a voice screaming. A young man, terrified and alone, drowning in an ocean of power he couldn't control, desperately trying not to hurt anyone. She didn't just feel the power. She felt the person wielding it. And her fear was instantly replaced by a wave of profound, heart-wrenching empathy. Ash saw her fall. He saw the pain on her face, and a fresh wave of self-loathing washed over him. He was a monster. A walking plague. He tried to rein it in, to pull the storm back into himself, but it was like trying to cup the ocean in his hands. The more he panicked, the more the storm raged. I'm sorry, he gasped, the words barely audible. I didn't mean to. Annabelle looked up, her violet eyes meeting his. She saw past the shimmering aura, past the overwhelming power. She saw the desperate plea in his eyes, and she understood. It's okay, a voice said, not in his ears, but directly in the center of his mind. It was a calm, clear, beautiful note that cut through the cacophony. Don't fight it. You're fighting yourself. Just, let me help you. She closed her eyes. She reached out, not with her own power, but with the bond she shared with her Pokémon. She felt the link to her Espeon, a connection of grace, intuition, and calm. She felt the link to her Alakazam, a connection of logic, order, and immense mental structure. She took those two threads of connection and, instead of using them to build a wall, she began to weave them into something new. A filter. A lens. Listen to my voice, she sent to him, her mental tone a soothing balm on his raw nerves. Focus on me. On my Pokémon. Feel our thoughts. They are ordered. They are calm. Let that order be your anchor. Ash, desperate, did as she asked. He focused on the pure, tranquil thought of Annabelle, using it as a focal point in the raging sea of his mind. He felt her psychic energy, supported by her partners, gently wrap around his own. It wasn't a cage or a shield. It was more like a focusing crystal. It didn't block the billion voices, but it organized them. The roaring static resolved into a coherent hum. The screaming cacophony became a manageable orchestra. For the first time since the spear pillar, there was a semblance of quiet in his head. The relief was so sudden, so total, that his knees buckled. Tears welled in his eyes, not of pain, but of profound, bone-deep gratitude. He could think. He could feel the solid floor beneath his feet without also feeling the tectonic plate it rested on. He was himself again. The oppressive psychic aura around him receded, pulling back into him like a tide. The Aegis agents, groaning, picked themselves up, looking around in dazed confusion, their minds ringing like a struck bell. Annabelle slowly rose to her feet, a little pale but her eyes shining. She had seen it. She had seen the universe coiled behind his eyes, and she had not been afraid, she had offered a hand. The lead agent, recovering his composure, stared at Ash, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and dawning realization. You, he breathed, his hand fumbling for a panic button on his belt. You're Acid Alpha 1. Before he could press it, Cynthia's Garchomp was there, a blur of blue and red, its claws resting gently but meaningfully on the man's shoulder. I don't think so, Cynthia said, stepping out from the corridor, her expression lethally calm. The standoff was over before it began. The agents, facing two champions and a psychic whose power they now profoundly respected, wisely chose to retreat, practically tripping over themselves to get out of the tower. In the sudden silence of the arena, Ash just looked at Annabelle, his throat too tight to speak. Thank you, he finally managed to say, the words feeling hopelessly inadequate. It's not gone, Annabelle said, her spoken voice as gentle as her mental one. I can't remove the power. I've just helped you find the volume knob. You were trying to block it all out, and the pressure was tearing you apart. You have to learn to let it flow through you, to filter what you need and let the rest go. She gave him a small, tired smile. It's a temporary fix. You'll have to learn to maintain the focus yourself. Teach me, Ash said, his voice filled with a desperate sincerity. Annabelle looked at the empty doorway where the Aegis agents had fled. She looked at her Pokémon, who watched her with unwavering loyalty. Her duty was here. But a greater duty had just walked through the door. This boy carried the fate of the world in his head, and he was bearing it alone. I will, she said, her decision made. I'll come with you. Their eyes met, and in that moment, a bond was forged, deeper than friendship, quieter than romance, built on the shared pressure of a cosmic secret. For the first time, Ash wasn't just a king or a monster. In Annabelle's eyes, he was just Ash, a boy who needed an anchor in the storm. And she would be that for him. Miles away, in a darkened training hall, a figure watched the battle feed from the Indigo Plateau, the one where Ash, using only Pikachu, had dismantled a team of Aegis's best. The figure was lean and intense, his purple hair framing a face locked in a perpetual scowl. A screen flickered to life on the wall, revealing the calm, composed face of Director Kalen. Well, Paul? Kalen's voice was smooth. What do you think of our Acid Alpha 1? Paul's eyes didn't leave the screen, where Pikachu was artfully dodging a hyper beam. He was watching Ash, his expression a mixture of grudging respect and predatory analysis. "He's disciplined," Paul said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "Reckless, but disciplined. His bond with that Pikachu is inefficiently strong. He's holding back. I can see it." "Indeed," Kalen agreed. "He has access to godlike power, yet he insists on fighting like a common trainer. It's admirable. And problematic. We need to know what he's capable of when he's pushed. We need to see the upper limits of this power." Paul finally turned from the screen to look at Kalen's image. A flicker of something cold and ambitious lit his eyes. "You want me to fight him?" "I want you to push him past his breaking point," Kalen corrected. "I'm assembling a team of trainers who have a history with Ketchum. Rivals. Those he has defeated, and those who have defeated him. Your job will be to engage him, to force him into a situation where he has no choice but to unleash the power we need to analyze." A slow, cruel smirk touched Paul's lips for the first time. The chance to battle Ash again, the Ash who had bested him at the Lily of the Valley conference, was a challenge he couldn't resist. The fact that this Ash was now a global-level threat only made it more appealing. "Tell me when and where," Paul said. "I'll break him for you." Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4, The Court of the Unwilling. The silence Ash now craved was a ghost. He chased it, but it was always just out of reach. Annabelle's technique was a godsend, a mental framework he clung to like a life raft, but it required constant, draining focus. It was the difference between holding his breath and learning to breathe underwater. He was still drowning, just more slowly. They had found refuge in a forgotten corner of the Johto region, a vast, mist-shrouded forest that grew around the base of Mount Silver. It was a place of old magic and older Pokémon, a place the modern world had largely paved around. Here, the hum of the Nexus was purer. The cacophony of human thought was a distant buzz on the horizon, allowing the ancient, slower voices of the world to become clearer. Ash practiced filtering them, Annabelle a patient tutor at his side. "Don't try to block them," she would say, her own mind a calm, steady presence he could anchor to. They would sit under the boughs of ancient trees, Pikachu dozing nearby. "That's like trying to dam a river with your bare hands. Just let them flow past. You are the stone in the stream. Acknowledge them, and let them go." He would try, focusing on her mental voice. He'd feel the slow, ponderous thoughts of a Steelix swimming through the earth miles below them. Acknowledge it. Strength. Pressure. Darkness. And then release it, turning his focus back to the scent of pine and the feel of the moss beneath him. It was a painstaking, exhausting meditation, and he could only hold the quiet for a few minutes at a time before the sheer volume of it all came crashing back in. Cynthia acted as their guardian and strategist. She watched the news feeds, tracked Aegis movements, and planned their routes. She was the one who saw the patterns, who noted that Kalen's public statements were becoming more aggressive. The search was escalating from a containment operation to a manhunt. "He's losing patience," she said one evening, the light from her Poké screen painting her face in grim tones. "The longer you remain free, the less control he has over the narrative. He can't afford for the world to see you as anything other than a monster." "Then we can't keep running," Ash said, looking up from his mental exercises. The decision had been crystallizing in his mind for days. "Running makes me look like a threat. We need answers. I need to understand what this thing inside me is, what happened to Arceus, and what that fragment was." "But who can we ask?" Annabelle wondered, her brow furrowed in thought. "The people who might have answers, the Ether Foundation, Professor Oak, the High Priestesses of Celestic Town, they will all be under Aegis surveillance." Ash closed his eyes, sinking back into the hum. Since the Spear Pillar, he had felt them all, the great and powerful consciousnesses that moved beneath the surface of the world. Most were elemental, primal forces. But one was different. He had felt its cold, analytical rage as a spike of pure, intellectual fury when the Nexus was born. It was a mind of immense power and profound, lonely intelligence. "There's one," Ash said, his voice quiet, "one who was made, not born. One who thinks like a human but holds the power of a legend." He opened his eyes, his gaze meeting Cynthia's. "Mewtwo." A heavy silence fell over their small camp. Even Pikachu's ears perked up at the name. To challenge Mewtwo was to invite a storm. To seek his counsel was unheard of. "It's a dangerous choice," Cynthia said carefully. Mewtwo's distrust of humanity is absolute. My distrust of him is well earned, a new voice said, echoing not in the clearing, but inside their skulls. It was a voice of cold steel and colder intellect, sharp-edged and utterly devoid of warmth. Your species is a plague, driven by greed and a lust for control. You are no different. The air grew heavy, the temperature dropping several degrees. From the deepest shadows between two ancient cedars, a figure emerged. It was tall and sleek, its gray and purple form a paradigm of bioengineered perfection. Its eyes glowed with a pale, violet light, burning with a fierce, calculating intelligence. Mewtwo had not been summoned. He had been listening. He took in the scene with a sweep of his gaze. Cynthia, tensed for battle, her hand already on Garchomp's Pokeball. Annabelle, pale but resolute, her Alakazam shimmering into existence beside her. And Ash, who remained seated, his expression not of fear, but of weary resignation. I had hoped to observe your decay from a distance, Mewtwo projected, his mental voice laced with contempt. But your psychic signature is a blight upon the quiet of this world. A constant, screaming testament to human arrogance. You have taken a power you could never comprehend and made yourself a king. I didn't ask for it, Ash said, getting to his feet. He met Mewtwo's furious gaze without flinching. And I don't want it. A convenient denial. Mewtwo scoffed, a faint purple aura beginning to coalesce around his hand. You are human. Power is your species' ultimate desire. You will use it to control, to dominate, to remake the world in your own flawed image. You are a far greater tyrant than the men who created me, for they only sought to control Pokémon. You hold the power to control reality itself. Then help me, Ash said, the simple plea cutting through Mewtwo's diatribe. Help me understand it. The creature that did this, it wounded Arceus. It's a threat to everyone, you included. The petty squabbles of gods do not concern me, Mewtwo retorted. My only concern is the threat you pose. Your very existence is an imbalance. An error. I have come to correct it. He raised his hand, and a sphere of roiling, chaotic dark energy, a shadow ball of terrifying density, formed in his palm. I will strip the nexus from your soul, even if it unravels you in the process. It is a necessary sacrifice. The shadow ball shot forward, not a projectile, but a localized tear in space, sucking the light and warmth from the air as it came. Cynthia shouted a warning. Alakazam erected a psychic barrier. But Ash stood his ground. The nexus inside him flared, the voices of the creation trio rising in his mind, offering him the power to bend space, to stop time, to obliterate the attack with a counterforce of equal magnitude. But a calmer voice cut through the divine panic. Annabelle's. Don't fight him, Ash. Don't prove him right. Show him he's wrong. He trusted her. He trusted that anchor of clarity. He let the divine power surge, but he did not shape it into a weapon. Instead of building a shield, he raised his hand, palm open, toward the incoming sphere of annihilation. He didn't push against it, he accepted it. He let the power of the Nexus flow from him, a wave of pure, unblemished creation energy. It was not an attack, it was a statement of what is. When the shadow ball, a construct of shadow and negative emotion, met the wave of pure existence, it could not survive. It did not explode, it simply ceased to be. The chaotic energy was unmade, deconstructed back into its component parts, dissolving into harmless, ambient particles that drifted away like motes of dust in a sunbeam. There was no flash, no sound. Just a quiet, absolute negation of violence. Mewtwo froze, his arms still outstretched. His glowing eyes widened fractionally. He had put enough power into that attack to level the mountain, and this human had undone it with the ease of a man waving away a fly. And he had done so without an ounce of malice. It was an act of absolute, nonviolent power that defied Mewtwo's understanding of conflict. You see, Ash said, his voice strained from the effort, I don't want to fight you. Before Mewtwo could process this, before the complex philosophical debate could continue, a new sound intruded. A sharp, mocking clap that echoed through the silent woods. Bravo, Ketchum. Very dramatic. Ash's blood ran cold. He knew that voice. From the trees on the opposite side of the clearing, a new figure emerged. He was dressed in dark, practical trainer's gear, his purple hair stark against the pale light, his face locked in its familiar, arrogant scowl. Paul. He wasn't alone. Behind him, 5 other trainers fanned out, their expressions ranging from grim to eager. Ash recognized a few of them from various leagues and tournaments. Tough, skilled trainers, all of them. They wore no uniform, but they moved with the coordinated, disciplined air of a unit. An Aegis unit. Paul's gaze swept over the scene, a flicker of cold amusement in his eyes as he took in Mewtwo. Well, you've been busy. Making friends with the local test subjects? His eyes finally settled on Ash, and they were as hard and unforgiving as ever. I heard you got strong. You're the world's biggest boogeyman now. Prove it. The challenge hung in the air, sharp and ugly. Ash was caught in an impossible position. He looked from Paul's smug, challenging face to Mewtwo's cold, judging one. The Aegis team was a physical threat. Mewtwo was an ideological one. And he was standing squarely in the middle. This is between you and me, Paul, Ash said, stepping forward. Leave them out of it. Sorry, no can do, Paul said with a shrug that was anything but casual. My orders from Director Kalen are to engage and analyze the full scope of your abilities. He's very interested to see what happens when you're put under pressure. So, let's see it. Let's see the god power. He pulled a Pokeball from his belt. Or are you going to hide behind your new pet? He added, nodding contemptuously toward Mewtwo. Mewtwo's psychic aura flared with incandescent rage at the insult, but Ash held up a hand. He's not my pet. And I'm not going to fight you with that power. To do so would be to murder them. Worse, it would prove Mewtwo's darkest fears right. It would make him the tyrant he swore he wasn't. Fine, Ash said, his mind racing. You want a battle? You'll get one. A full 6-on-6. Paul smirked, his team readying their own Pokeballs, finally talking sense. But on one condition, Ash added, his voice ringing with a sudden, unshakable clarity. He looked at Pikachu, who had leapt from his lap to his shoulder, cheeks sparking. I'll use only one Pokémon. The smirk vanished from Paul's face, replaced by a look of disbelief, which quickly curdled into fury. What did you say? Are you mocking me? You heard me, Ash said, his gaze steady. My 1 against your 6. That's the deal. Take it or leave it. It was an act of profound, almost insane defiance, but it was also a perfect strategic move. It was the only way to prove his point to both his enemies at once. He would show Paul the power of a bond he could never understand, and he would show Mewtwo the meaning of restraint. Paul stared at him for a long, tense moment, his pride warring with his orders. The sheer arrogance of the offer was a personal insult, but the opportunity to humiliate Ash, to crush his ace before the eyes of the world, was too tempting. You're a fool, Ketchum, he snarled. I accept. Ash, you can't, Cynthia protested. Their team will be designed for this. It's a trap. It's the only way, Ash said, never taking his eyes off Paul. He turned his head slightly, just enough to look at the silent, floating form of Mewtwo. Watch, he said, his voice low. Watch what real power looks like. Paul took his position. Aggron, stand by for battle, he roared, throwing his first Pokeball. The massive, bipedal fortress of steel and rock appeared with a ground-shaking thud, its metallic roar echoing through the trees. Ash nodded to his partner. Pikachu, I choose you. Pikachu leapt from his shoulder, landing with a soft patter, a tiny spark of yellow defiance against a mountain of living armor. The battle began. Aggron, metal burst. Paul commanded immediately, going for overwhelming power. Aggron's body glowed with a blinding, metallic sheen, ready to reflect any attack with double the force. Quick attack, get in close, Ash countered. Pikachu became a yellow blur, not aiming for Aggron, but for its legs. He was too fast for the lumbering giant to track. He zipped between its feet, forcing it to turn, its metal burst useless without a target. Annoying pest. Stone edge, sharp, glowing pillars of rock erupted from the ground, chasing Pikachu. Iron tail, on the ground. Pikachu leapt, spinning, his tail glowing like forged steel. He didn't try to break the rocks. He slammed his tail into the earth. The shockwave sent a spray of dirt and loose stones into Aggron's face, momentarily blinding it. In that split second, Pikachu ran up one of the stone-edge pillars and launched himself into the air. Thunderbolt. A massive bolt of lightning crashed down, striking Aggron directly on the head. The super-effective attack made the steel giant roar in pain and stumble. You'll have to do better than that, Paul sneered, recalling the wounded Aggron. Gastrodon, your turn. Use muddy water. The sea slug Pokémon appeared, instantly spewing a massive, swirling vortex of filth that coated the entire area, obscuring vision and making the ground a treacherous bog. "He's controlling the battlefield," Cynthia murmured to Annabelle, her eyes narrowed in analysis. "He's trying to neutralize Pikachu's speed." "Nowhere to run," Paul mocked. "Ice Beam." A beam of pure cold shot through the murk. But Ash's senses, sharpened by the Nexus, were not so easily fooled. He didn't see through the mud. He felt the shift in air temperature, the path of the attack. "Pikachu, spin and use Thunderbolt." The command was instantaneous. Pikachu became a whirling vortex of electricity, the lightning not aimed, but discharged in all directions. It turned the muddy water into a massive conductor, shocking Gastrodon and, more importantly, instantly evaporating the water, clearing the field in a cloud of steam. Pikachu stood in the center, panting but unharmed. One by one, Paul sent out his Pokémon. A Drapion, whose poison spikes were rendered useless by Pikachu's agility. A Ninjask, whose blinding speed was matched by Pikachu's own quick attack. Each one was a powerhouse, a tactical piece in a well-designed machine of a team. And one by one, Pikachu, guided by Ash's flawless, almost precognitive commands, dismantled them. It wasn't about power. It was about perfect timing, creative use of the environment, and an unspoken, instantaneous communication between trainer and Pokémon. Mewtwo watched in absolute silence. He saw no fear, no hesitation. He saw a boy and his Pokémon, two minds working as one, their bond a tangible force that was rewriting the rules of the battle. He saw Ash's strategy, his empathy for his Pokémon's fatigue, and his unwavering restraint. This was not the act of a tyrant. It was the act of a guardian. Finally, it came down to the last one. "You've gotten lucky," Paul snarled, his composure cracking. "But it ends now. Electivire, let's go." The electric behemoth appeared, its twin tails crackling with immense power. This was Paul's ace, the ultimate symbol of his philosophy of pure, overwhelming strength. The air itself thrummed with static. Pikachu was visibly exhausted, leaning heavily on his small paws. Electivire looked fresh, its motor drive ability practically vibrating with anticipation for an electric attack. "This is over," Paul declared. "Electivire, Thunder Punch." Electivire's fist became a ball of raging electricity as it charged. "Pikachu, meet it with Volt Tackle," Ash commanded. "What?" Cynthia gasped. "That's insane. Electivire's ability will absorb it and make it unstoppable." But Ash had seen something. Pikachu, trusting his partner completely, shrouded himself in a suicidal blaze of golden energy and charged forward. The two electric attacks were about to collide in a massive explosion. "Now, Pikachu, Iron Tail on its fist," Ash yelled at the last possible second. Pikachu, still cloaked in the energy of Volt Tackle, angled his body. His tail hardened into steel and, instead of hitting Electivire's body, he precisely slammed it onto the fist, generating the Thunder Punch. It wasn't an attack, it was a circuit. Pikachu's Volt Tackle energy, instead of hitting Electivire, was conducted through the Thunder Punch and directly into Electivire's own body. Electivire's motor drive was designed to absorb incoming electric attacks. It wasn't designed to handle its own massive output being force-fed back into it in a feedback loop. The Pokémon seized up, its own power overloading its systems. It cried out in pain and confusion before collapsing in a heap, sparks sputtering from its body. Silence. Paul stared at his fallen ace, his mouth agape. He had lost. His entire team, designed by the best minds in the Aegis Accord, had been systematically defeated by a single, exhausted Pikachu. Ash rushed to his partner's side, scooping him up. "You were amazing, buddy," he whispered, feeding him a piece of a citrus berry. Paul recalled his Electivire without a word. He looked at Ash, his expression no longer angry, but hollow. The cold, hard logic on which he had built his entire identity as a trainer had just been shattered. He turned and walked away, his team following him in stunned silence. Ash stood in the quiet aftermath, the exhaustion hitting him like a physical blow. He had won. He had proven his point. He looked up at Mewtwo. The legendary Pokémon's violet eyes were no longer burning with contempt. They were filled with a complex, calculating light. "Your methods are inefficient," Mewtwo's voice echoed in his mind, but the sharp edges had been smoothed away. "Your sentimentality is a profound weakness." A long pause. "And yet, you were victorious." "I do not understand it." This bond, it is a variable I cannot account for. It's not a variable, Ash said, his voice soft, it's the whole equation. Mewtwo hovered for another moment. You are not the tyrant I foresaw, he stated. It was the closest he could come to an apology. I will not be your subject. I will not bow to a human king. He turned to leave, then pause. But I will observe. This path you walk, I wish to see where it leads. And with that, he vanished into the shadows, leaving behind not an enemy, but a powerful, skeptical observer. In his subterranean command center, Director Kalen watched the live feed cut out. He stared at the blank screen, his teacup resting untouched on his desk. His face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. The plan had been an utter, humiliating failure. Ash hadn't just defeated his elite unit. He had done it in the most theatrical, defiant way possible, proving he didn't need his divine power to be a world-class threat. He's disciplined, Kalen said to the empty room, the words tasting like ash. A god who could be baited or panicked was a manageable problem. A god who could choose to fight as a man, and win, was an ideological nightmare. He was a symbol. And symbols were dangerous. He pressed a button on his console. Commander, he said, his voice dropping to an icy whisper. The rival engagement protocol has failed. The asset is more resourceful than we anticipated. He took a slow, deliberate breath. Update all Aegis field operatives. The containment directive is now rescinded. Asset Alpha 1 is to be considered an imminent and hostile threat to global sovereignty. Lethal force is authorized. The soft approach was over. The hunt had just become a war. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5, The Alto Mare Infection. The running had changed. It was no longer a panicked flight but a strategic, nomadic existence. Under Cynthia's guidance, they moved with the rhythm of the wild, leaving no traces, becoming ghosts in a world that was hunting them with satellite imaging and psychic sensors. Days were spent in the quiet discipline of control. Ash, with Annabelle as his guide and anchor, was slowly learning the terrifying geography of his own mind. He learned to distinguish the voices. The slow, geological rumble of the Regis was different from the sharp, temporal clarity of Dialga. He learned that Groudon's consciousness felt like the dry, baking heat of a desert at noon, while Kyogre's was the cold, crushing pressure of the abyssal deep. He learned to let these titanic thoughts flow past him, to be the stone in the river, as Annabelle had taught. The roaring hurricane in his head was now a manageable, if still exhausting, gale. But one day, a new sound began to filter through the divine static. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't a thought. It was a feeling. A thin, high, and discordant note of wrongness, like a single string on a violin played painfully out of tune. It was a psychic keen of profound and utter despair. And it was getting louder. It pricked at the edges of his consciousness while he was awake and infected his dreams when he slept. He dreamt of a city of canals, of white stone buildings and shimmering water, but the colors were all muted, as if seen through a veil of gray dust. He dreamt of soaring through the sky, but there was no joy in it, only a hollow, aimless wandering. He awoke with a gasp one morning in their hidden camp, the dream sensation of listless sorrow clinging to him like a shroud. Alto Mare, he breathed, the name a stone in his gut. Annabelle, who had been meditating nearby, opened her eyes, her expression troubled. I feel it too, she said, her mental voice a whisper inside his head. A psychic signal, but it's empty. It feels like the silence from the spear pillar. The nothingness. Pikachu, sensing Ash's distress, nudged his hand, a worried chirp escaping him. Ash felt a phantom pain echo through the nexus, a sharp, specific cry linked to two consciousnesses he knew well. Latios and Latios. It was their pain, their confusion, that was cutting through the noise. Their fears were confirmed when Cynthia, her face grim, showed them the newsfeed on her Pokésh. The screen showed the beautiful island city of Alto Mare, but it was surrounded by a cordon of gray Aegis Accord battleships. The headline read, Psychic contagion grips Alto Mare, Aegis establishes quarantine zone. The report was chilling. A mysterious lethargy was spreading through the city. People were quitting their jobs, abandoning their passions, sitting listlessly in their homes. Pokémon were refusing to battle, their inner fire seemingly extinguished. The city's vibrant, joyful aura was being replaced by a creeping, infectious apathy. Aegis scientists had dubbed it apathetic hysteria syndrome, and Director Kalen, in a live address, had announced that if the contagion could not be contained, They were preparing to deploy an experimental weapon, the UX-01 stasis field, to sterilize the island of the psychic infection, a clinical, horrifying euphemism for wiping it off the map. "It's a trap," Cynthia said, her voice tight with anger. "Kalen knows about your connection to Latios and Latios. He's daring you. Either you reveal yourself by trying to intervene, or you sit back and let him paint you as a coward who allowed a city to die." Ash stared at the screen, at the gray, lifeless image of a city he loved. He felt the psychic screaming of the Eon duo, a constant needle of agony in his mind. This wasn't a strategic choice. It wasn't about Kalen or the Aegis Accord. It was about the people, the Pokémon, and the two friends who were crying out for help. "We're going," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Ash, the entire island is a cage," Cynthia warned. "They'll have every sensor imaginable pointed at it, waiting for you." "Then they'll find me," he replied, his eyes hard. "Let them. I'm not going to let that thing, do to Alto Mare what it did to Arceus." He looked at Annabelle. "I can feel it. It's another one of them, another fragment." "I agree," Annabelle said, her expression serene but her eyes burning with resolve. "This is the first true test of your new role. You're not just a powerhouse, Ash. You're a guardian. We can't stand by." As they discussed their impossible plan, a shadow fell over them. The air grew cold, and a familiar, powerful presence made the hairs on their arms stand on end. "This entity you speak of," Mewtwo's mental voice cut in, as he materialized from the shadows, his violet eyes fixed on the Pokésh screen. "It does not merely defeat its opponents. It erases them. This apathy, it is not a psychic attack. It is the unmaking of consciousness itself." He turned his intense gaze to Ash. "It is an ontological poison. An antithesis to all existence, human and Pokémon alike. It must be purged." Ash was taken aback. He had expected judgment, or at best, dispassionate observation. He had not expected this cold, righteous fury. "Are you offering to help?" Ash asked. "I am offering to eliminate a shared threat," Mewtwo corrected, though his reasoning was clear. He would not stand by and allow a force that sought to silence all thought to exist. "My power will provide you the cover you need to enter the city undetected. But what you find there, that will be your battle to wage." Their vessel was unconventional. Mewtwo himself. He enveloped them, Ash, Annabelle, Cynthia, and Pikachu, in a bubble of shimmering psychic energy that rendered them invisible to sight and sensor alike. They flew over the Aegis blockade, a ghost slipping through the bars of the cage. The moment they passed the quarantine line, the feeling hit them all. It was a crushing wave of spiritual exhaustion. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken grief. The city below was beautiful as ever, but it was a soulless beauty, like a perfect painting of a city rather than a living one. The vibrant colors seemed dull, the cheerful sounds of the canals were absent. There was only a profound, oppressive silence. They landed in a deserted plaza, and the psychic shield dissolved. Annabelle gasped, clutching her head. "It's a song," she whispered, her eyes wide with strain. "A constant, psychic drone. It's whispering that nothing matters. That it's better to just stop." Ash felt it too, a seductive, venomous lullaby that promised the peace of oblivion. The nexus inside him recoiled, its own vibrant, chaotic energy of creation a shield against the song of the void. But it was a constant, draining pressure. "We need to find the source," Cynthia said, her own iron will fighting against the oppressive atmosphere. "I can feel Latios and Latios," Ash said, closing his eyes. "They're in pain. Frightened. At the secret garden." He pointed across the canals, toward the hidden heart of the city. "The song is strongest there," Annabelle confirmed, her face pale. "It's the epicenter." They moved through the silent streets, the journey a form of psychological torture. They saw a baker, sitting on the floor of his shop, surrounded by fresh bread he had no will to sell. They saw a gondolier, his gondola drifting aimlessly, his head in his hands. It was a city of ghosts. The closer they got to the garden, the stronger the void song became. It was beginning to affect them, a subtle poison seeping into their thoughts. Cynthia found her hand hesitating as she reached for a Pokeball. Annabelle's focus began to waver. I can't pinpoint it anymore," Annabelle stammered, her psychic senses clouded by the overwhelming despair. "It's everywhere." "Then we fight back," Ash said, his voice a raw, determined growl. He stopped, planting his feet on the stone walkway. We give them another song to listen to. He closed his eyes, reaching into himself, past the divine hum, past the fear, and into the core of who he was. He searched for his strongest memories, his most powerful emotions. He found the blazing, defiant joy of winning his first gym badge. He found the fierce, protective love he felt for Pikachu. He found the memory of standing with all his Pokémon, friends, and rivals at the closing ceremonies of the Lily of the Valley Conference, a moment of pure, shared ambition. He found the quiet, grounding calm he felt whenever Annabelle met his gaze. He took these feelings, love, joy, ambition, hope, peace, and, using the Nexus as an amplifier, he broadcast them. A faint, golden aura began to shimmer around him. It wasn't an attack. It was a psychic pulse of pure, unadulterated life. It was a countersong. A defiant shout of, "I am," against the void's whisper of, "You are not." The oppressive atmosphere lessened. Annabelle gasped as her mind cleared, the drone of despair pushed back by the warmth of Ash's broadcast. "Ash, it's working." Mewtwo watched, his expression unreadable. He could feel the broadcast, a wave of raw, unfiltered emotion that was utterly alien to his own disciplined mind. It was chaotic, sentimental, and illogical. And it was undeniably powerful. With Ash now acting as a mobile beacon of hope, they were able to press on. They reached the ornate gates of the secret garden. The gates were open. Inside, the lush, vibrant paradise Ash remembered was gone. The grass was a sickly gray-green. The flowers had wilted, their petals brown and crumbling. And in the center, the soul dew, the sacred artifact that was the very lifeblood of the city and its guardians, was no longer a beautiful, glowing orb. It was a sphere of dull, lifeless gray stone. Hovering above it was the source of the infection. It wasn't a creature of jagged shards this time. It was a perfect, shimmering sphere of blackness. A hole in the world that seemed to absorb the very color and life from its surroundings. It was a visual representation of the void song, the fragment. And guarding it were Latios and Latios. They floated listlessly on either side of the black sphere. Their beautiful red and blue hides faded to a dusty gray. Their usual intelligent, curious eyes were gone. In their place were two pairs of flat, black, empty voids. They were not hostile. They were not aggressive. They were simply empty shells. Latios, Latios, Ash cried out, taking a step forward. The Eon duo turned their empty gaze on him. There was no recognition. They simply moved to block his path, their movements slow, robotic. "They're puppets," Mewtwo stated, a cold fury entering his mental voice. "Their consciousness has been hollowed out. A profound violation." "We have to get to that thing," Cynthia said, readying a Pokeball. "We have to fight them." "No," Ash said, his voice shaking. He looked at their empty eyes, at the memory of their shared laughter and adventures. He couldn't. Hurting them, even in this state, felt like a betrayal too deep to bear. This was a rescue, not a battle. He needed to reach them. He needed to break the silencer's hold. But how? A physical attack was unthinkable. A psychic attack could damage their already fragile minds. He was a king with an arsenal of divine weapons, and all of them were useless. Then don't use a weapon. Annabelle's thought was a gentle touch in his mind. Use your voice. Not as a trainer, Ash. As their friend. As their king. His king. The word still felt wrong, a costume that didn't fit. But he looked at the empty shells of his friends, and he felt the immense, foundational power coiled inside him. It wasn't just his power. It belonged to the world. It belonged to them. He had to use it. He took a deep breath, letting the chaotic symphony of the Nexus flow through him. He didn't suppress it. He embraced it. He let the strength of Groudon anchor his feet to the ground. He let the serene wisdom of Palkia and Dialga focus his intent. He stood tall, and for the first time, he did not feel like a boy playing dress-up. He felt the weight of the crown. He looked at Latios and Latios, at the void in their eyes, and he spoke. His voice was not a shout. It was a quiet, resonant chord of absolute authority, a fusion of his own heart and the power of the original one. It was a command that did not compel, but healed. B.A.T. Peace. The words were a physical force, a psychic shockwave of pure, benevolent will. It was not an attack on the void's control. It was a reassertion of their true nature. The golden aura around Ash exploded outward, washing over the two legendary Pokémon. For a moment, they seized up, a silent, psychic scream echoing from their hollow minds as two opposite, absolute commands warred within them. Then, with a shudder that ran through their entire bodies, the flat, black nothingness in their eyes shattered like dark glass, revealing the warm, intelligent, golden eyes beneath. The color rushed back into their hides. They blinked, dazed and confused, and then turned to see Ash, a weak, joyful cry escaping them both. The Void's puppets were gone. His friends were back. With Latios and Latios free but exhausted, Ash turned his full attention to the black sphere, the wound in reality. Mewtwo, can we destroy it? Negative, Mewtwo replied instantly, his own senses analyzing the fragment. It is a hole in the fabric of this dimension. A conventional attack would only widen the tear. Its destruction would create a vacuum that could unravel this entire island. You can't punch a hole. Ash remembered the thought from the spear pillar. You can't fight nothingness. He looked at the Nexus energy shimmering on his hands. It had undone Mewtwo's Shadow Ball. It had obliterated the first fragment. But this was different. This required a different solution. Not destruction. Creation. I have to fill it, Ash said, the terrible, simple logic of it settling upon him. I have to heal it. Ash, no, Annabelle cried, sensing his intent. The cost, you don't know what it will do to you. It's the only way, he said, his gaze fixed on the sphere of absolute nothing. He walked forward until he stood before it, the cold radiating from it chilling him to the bone. He took one last look at Annabelle, at the pure, terrified concern on her face, and gave her a small, determined smile. Then he plunged his hands into the void. The pain was absolute. It was the feeling of his soul being siphoned into a vacuum. The sphere drank his energy, his life force, his very essence, and it was a bottomless thirst. He screamed, a raw, guttural sound of pure agony as the golden light of the Nexus poured from him into the black hole. He felt his consciousness fraying again, not from too much input, but from being drained into nothing. Stay with me, Ash. Annabelle's voice was a lifeline in the storm of pain. She was there, at the edge of his mind, lending him her strength, her focus, her will. Don't let go. He held on to her voice. He poured more of himself into the void, not just the raw power of the Nexus, but his own essence. His memories. His bonds. He was patching a hole in reality with the fabric of his own heart. Slowly, impossibly, the black sphere began to shrink. The edges solidified, the void black turning to gray, then to a shining, crystalline white. With a final, agonizing push, Ash poured the last of his strength into it. The sphere imploded, not into nothingness, but into a single, brilliant point of light that then harmlessly dissipated. The wound was healed. The color and life rushed back into the secret garden with the force of a tidal wave. The grass became a vibrant green, the flowers bloomed in an explosion of color, and the soul dew glowed with a pure, brilliant light, stronger than ever before. Ash collapsed to his knees, his body spent. Blood trickled from his nose and the corners of his ears. The world swam in his vision. Annabelle was there in an instant, catching him before he hit the ground, her arms wrapped around him. You did it, she whispered, her voice thick with tears and relief. He leaned against her, the pain already subsiding, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. He had won. He had saved the city. But the price was a stark, terrifying reminder of the power he now wielded. Far across the cosmos, in a realm of perfect, silent non-existence, a consciousness stirred. It had felt the correction of its fragment, the sealing of its wound. It was not anger or frustration it felt, but a cold, dispassionate curiosity. An anomaly. A variable had been introduced into the equation of universal decay. A new, opposing law had been written. For the first time since the dawn of creation, the silencer turned its vast, unblinking attention toward a small, noisy, insignificant blue-green planet. It had found its opposite. It had found its enemy. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Summit of the Divine. The victory at Alto Mare was a hollow one. They had saved the city, but Ash had felt the cost in his own bones, a chilling reminder of the void he had filled with a piece of his soul. He spent 2 full days recovering in the revitalized secret garden, under the watchful, grateful eyes of Latios and Latios, the exhaustion a physical weight that even the Nexus's constant energy couldn't fully lift. Annabelle stayed by his side, her calming presence a shield, helping him rebuild the mental filters that the ordeal had shattered. But the world did not wait. While Alto Mare healed, the planet began to sicken. The reports came in through Cynthia's encrypted channels, a litany of escalating disasters. Unprecedented droughts were scorching the farmlands of Johto, while biblical floods were carving new rivers through the deserts of Hoenn. Volcanic chains, dormant for centuries, were sputtering to life along the ring of fire. The seas were churning, with rogue waves and hurricanes forming out of calm skies. The cause was not a mystery to Ash. He could feel it in the dissonant, angry thrumming in his head. Without the absolute authority of Arceus to maintain the balance, the ancient, primal rivalries were reigniting. Groudon and Kyogre, he said, his voice heavy as he looked at a satellite map of the world's weather patterns, a swirling, chaotic mess of red and blue. They're not just fighting. They're trying to remake the world in their own image. Rayquaza should be intervening, Cynthia noted, her brow furrowed. The ancient accord demands it. Rayquaza is a moderator, not a monarch, Mewtwo's voice cut into their thoughts. The legendary Pokémon had been observing them from a distance, a silent, violet-eyed sentinel. He now floated into the garden, his expression one of grim analysis. It can quell their battles, but it cannot command their obedience. Without the final authority of the original one, the system is collapsing into chaos. Each of the primals now sees a power vacuum. They will not stop until one has dominated the other, and the planet will be their casualty. So what do we do? Annabelle asked, looking at Ash with concern. You can't be everywhere at once. You can't personally stop them every time they start to fight. No, Mewtwo agreed. A king does not fight every battle himself. He commands his armies. He holds court. He turned his intense gaze on Ash. You hold the power of Arceus. The nexus of origin. You are the de facto replacement for its authority. You have tried to run from this title, to hide from this power. That time is over. If you wish to prevent this world from tearing itself apart, you must assert your claim. Ash felt a cold dread creep up his spine. Assert my claim? What does that even mean? You will call them, Mewtwo stated, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. All of them. The guardians of the seas and skies, the masters of time and space, the keepers of ideals and truth, the ancient titans, the primal forces. You will summon them to a single place, a neutral ground where their power can be contained. You will call a summit. A summit of gods. The idea was so audacious, so utterly insane, that Ash almost laughed. He was a 19-year-old trainer from Pallet Town. He was supposed to officiate a debate between the living embodiments of the land and the sea. They won't come, Ash said flatly. Why would they listen to me? They will have no choice, Mewtwo replied, a flicker of something that might have been grim satisfaction in his eyes. The Nexus does not send an invitation. It issues a subpoena. The same power you used to compel the Regis will bring them to your feet. They will come. Whether they will listen, that will be up to you. The decision was terrifying, but the alternative, a world slowly being destroyed by a divine civil war, was unthinkable. This was the responsibility he had inherited. He could no longer deny it. Where? Cynthia asked, ever the strategist. Where in the world could you possibly host such a gathering without it being noticed by Aegis, or without the planet being destroyed by the sheer concentration of power? Ash closed his eyes, sinking into the hum. He reached out, not to a specific mind, but to the concept of a place. A place of judgment. A place of origin. He found it, a non-space that existed just outside the borders of their reality, a dimensional hall connected to the spear pillar. It was empty now, echoing with a profound and terrible silence. The throne was vacant. The Hall of Origin, Ash said, his voice a whisper. He stood, walking to the center of the garden. He took a deep, steadying breath, Annabelle's calming mental presence a cool hand on his shoulder. He closed his eyes and reached into the core of the Nexus. He didn't focus on a single being, but on a classification, a signature of power that all legendaries shared. He found the resonant frequency of their divinity, and he pulled. It was not a word. It was not a thought. It was a single, absolute, undeniable decree that resonated across the planet and through the dimensions. Come. In the deepest trenches of the ocean, Lugia's serene, silver eyes snapped open, its psychic slumber shattered. The call was a hook in its very soul, pulling it upward. High above the clouds, Ho-Oh, a rainbow comet painting the sky, abruptly changed its endless course, turning toward the distant peak of Mount Coronet. Deep within a magma chamber, Groudon's world-shaking roar of fury at its ancient enemy was cut short. A new, greater authority had superseded its rage. It turned, its massive form beginning to move, not toward the sea, but toward the surface. In the churning abyss, Kyogre paused its assault on a continental shelf. The command was absolute, an imperative it could not defy, overriding even its primal hatred. In the distortion world, Giratina's shadowy form stilled, its gaze turning from its own chaotic realm toward the crack in its reality that led to the spear pillar. In their own dimensions, Dialga and Palkia felt the summons and began to move. Across the globe, the story was the same. From the Swords of Justice to the Lake Guardians, from the Dao Trio to the sleeping Regigigas, the call went out, and it was answered. Not out of loyalty, but out of an irresistible, ancient compulsion. The king had called his court, and they were coming. Ash collapsed to one knee, the effort of a truly global summons draining him. They're on their way, he gasped. Then so are we, Mewtwo stated, and once again, they were encased in a psychic bubble, hurtling through the sky toward the highest peak in Sinnoh. They arrived at the spear pillar to a scene of impossible majesty and terrifying power. The sky was filled with gods. They did not land, but hovered in the thin, cold air, a silent, wary congregation of living myths. The air crackled with a tension so thick it was a physical force, a blend of 1,000 different, powerful auras that threatened to tear the very fabric of space apart. Ash, flanked by his friends and Mewtwo, walked to the dais. He felt the dimensional resonance and pushed, using the Nexus to open the way. The air before them shimmered and tore open, revealing not the inside of a mountain, but a vast, impossible space. The Hall of Origin was a cathedral of light and crystal, a floating platform in a sea of stars. In the center, a raised throne sat empty, a stark reminder of the power that was gone. The moment the portal opened, the legendaries began to file in, their forms seeming to shimmer as they passed through the dimensional gate. They were not a unified group. They were factions, separated by instinct and history. Groudon and Kyogre took opposite sides of the massive hall, the air between them sizzling with hatred. Magma dripping from Groudon's claws and condensation forming around Kyogre's fins. Rayquaza descended from above, a sinuous, emerald dragon, positioning itself between them, its roar a clear warning. The creation trio, Dialga, Palkia, and a shimmering, half-present Giratina, took up a space near the throne, their presence warping the very physics of the hall. Lugia and Ho-Oh, guardians of the sea and sky, remained near the entrance, their auras a strange mixture of ancient peace and profound alarm. Zekrom and Reshiram, the dragons of ideals and truth, mirrored each other, their bodies crackling with blue and red lightning, their gazes fixed on Ash with an unnerving, judgmental intensity. The lesser legends, the birds, the beasts, the golems, the genies, all found their own places, forming a silent, wary audience. The combined psychic pressure was immense, 1,000 times worse than the ambient noise Ash was used to. Even with Annabelle's help, it was a struggle to simply think. Ash walked to the center of the hall, feeling impossibly small, a fragile human boy in an assembly of living gods. He took his place before the empty throne. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the low growl of Groudon and the hiss of steam as its heat met Kyogre's chill. He had their attention. Now what? Before he could speak, Zekrom's voice, like the crackle of a thunderstorm, echoed through the hall. Less than you are the human who holds the core. You summoned us. By what right do you claim this authority? Greater than. Less than he seeks to be a new master, greater than Reshiram's voice, like the roar of a furnace, replied. Less than a false truth to replace the real one that is lost. Can a human heart be trusted with the power of creation? Greater than. The challenge had been issued. Ash opened his mouth to respond, but his voice was drowned out by a world-shaking roar. Groudon, its patience gone, lunged at Kyogre, its claws superheated to a glowing orange. Kyogre met the charge with a hydro pump of immense, pressurized force. The hall erupted into chaos. Rayquaza's dragon ascent was a green blur as it slammed into both combatants, trying to force them apart. Dialga let out a cry, and Groudon's charge slowed, caught in a minor temporal distortion. Palkia retaliated, warping the space around Kyogre's waterspout, sending it splashing harmlessly against the crystalline ceiling. The factions began to choose sides, auras flaring, ancient rivalries reigniting in an instant. It wasn't a summit. It was the prelude to a war that would unmake the universe. Ash was completely and utterly out of his depth. He was a trainer, a strategist. He solved problems by battling, by connecting. This was divine politics, a storm of egos as old as the world itself, and he was standing in the eye of it, helpless. The power of the Nexus surged within him, offering him the strength to crush them all, to force them to their knees with a single thought. The temptation was a dark, seductive poison. Don't. Annabelle's voice was a desperate, terrified plea in his mind. Don't become what they fear you are. Her voice cut through his panic. She was right. He couldn't command them. He couldn't be another Arceus. He had to be Ash Ketchum. He didn't shout. He didn't unleash his power. He let all his fear, his frustration, his desperation, and his honesty show on his face. He let them see the terrified, determined 19-year-old boy under the mantle of a king. Then he spoke, his voice quiet, yet carried by the Nexus to every corner of the hall, cutting through the roars and the sounds of battle. Stop. The word had no command in it. It was a plea. The fighting faltered. The gods turned to look at him. You're right, he said, his voice shaking but clear. He looked at Zekrom and Reshiram. You're right to question me. I have no right to this power. I didn't earn it. I didn't even want it. I was just there. I'm not Arceus. I can't be. I'm a human, and I am scared out of my mind. He let the raw, honest confession hang in the air. The raw vulnerability of it was more shocking to the ancient beings than any display of power could have been. I can't sit on that throne and pretend I know how to balance the world, he continued, his voice gaining strength. But I know this. While you were fighting, while you were arguing over who has more right to what piece of the planet, something else is coming. The thing that broke Arceus. The thing that tried to unmake Alto Mare. A silence that wants to devour us all. It's not just a threat to humanity. It's a threat to everything. To life. To choice. To the very idea of existence. He looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of gods. I didn't summon you here to be your king. I summoned you here to ask for your help. We can either tear this world apart fighting each other over the scraps of the old way, or we can fight together to build a new one. To protect our home. I can't do it alone. His speech, his plea, was met with a profound, uncertain silence. He had offered them not a command, but a choice. The silence was broken by a sound that did not belong in this sacred place. It was a slow, deliberate, mocking clap. Oh, very good, a woman's voice said, dripping with a cold, amused contempt. The little king, pleading with his broken toys. Such a touching display of futility. A ripple of darkness appeared in the center of the hall, a blot of anti-energy that coalesced into a human form. It was a woman in a shattered Aegis Command uniform, her face pale and drawn. But her eyes were pits of absolute void, and from her back, 6 jagged shards of the same solidified nothingness as the first fragment fanned out like broken wings. She was radiating a cold that was not the absence of heat, but the absence of life, of hope. Director Kalen's second in command, Cynthia breathed in horror. Commander Melia. Not anymore, the woman, the Echo, replied with a smile that did not reach her void black eyes. Director Kalen still clings to the foolish notion of control. I have embraced a much greater truth. The truth of silence. She looked around at the assembled gods, her smile widening. So much noise. So much pointless struggle. It's time for it all to end. She raised a hand, and a lance of the same negating energy that had wounded Arceus shot toward a startled Lugia. But before it could connect, Mewtwo was there, a shimmering psychic barrier absorbing the impact. The barrier cracked and hissed, the psychic energy being unmade at the point of contact. So, Mewtwo projected, his voice a low, dangerous growl. The void has found a voice. It has, the Echo purred, and it has so much to say. She laughed, a chilling, empty sound, and the shards on her back flared. My master grows weary of these little incursions. He sent me to deliver a message to the new anomaly. Her eyes fixed on Ash. And to begin the true cleansing. She didn't move, but the air around her warped. The divine energy that made up the Hall of Origin began to unravel. The gods cried out in alarm and pain as her aura of anti-energy began to actively poison their nature. Kyogre's water form began to hiss and evaporate. Groudon's magma plates cooled and cracked. This was not a fragment. This was a true divine-level threat, a human mind willingly bonded with the power of the void, directing its silent, hungry power with intelligent, malicious intent. The gods, who moments before had been ready to tear each other apart, now faced a common enemy that could unmake them all. They turned, not as factions, but as a single, terrified, and furious force, their combined power aimed at the laughing woman in the center of their most sacred hall. And Ash, standing before the empty throne, felt his nexus sense flare to life, no longer a chaotic storm, but a crystal-clear tactical map. He saw the flow of energy, the weaknesses in the Echo's aura, the perfect timing for a combined assault. He saw his role. He was not a king who sat on a throne. He was a commander who stood on the battlefield. Palkia! He yelled, his voice ringing with newfound authority. Distort the space behind her. Lugia, Aeroblast. Now, we need to pin her down. The Age of Gods was over. The war against the Silence had just begun. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Aegis Trap. The battle in the Hall of Origin was not a battle of power, but of syntax. The Echo, Commander Melia, was a living embodiment of the Void's grammar, a force that unmade, deleted, and silenced. The assembled legendaries were the universe's vibrant, chaotic language, a symphony of creation, emotion, and existence. And Ash, standing at the conductor's podium, had to make them sing in harmony. Palkia. Distort the space behind her. Ash's voice, amplified by the Nexus, was a pure, clear command that cut through the chaos. Palkia roared, and the star-dusted floor behind the Echo warped, folding in on itself like a crumpled piece of paper, seeking to trap her. Lugia, Aeroblast. Now, Lugia unleashed a focused, spiraling vortex of air, not aimed to strike, but to corral, to force the Echo into Palkia's spatial trap. Melia laughed, the sound an ugly, grating static. Clever tricks, she hissed, and simply stepped sideways, her foot landing on a piece of reality that shouldn't have been there. She moved through space as if it were a suggestion, not a law. The Aeroblast and the spatial distortion collided, creating a silent, violent implosion of energy. The gods learned a new, terrifying lesson. They couldn't fight her directly. To attack her was to attack the nothingness she represented, a futile and exhausting endeavor. They had to fight the space around her. Groudon, precipice blades. Not at her, around her. Box her in. Ash commanded. Massive spears of superheated rock erupted from the crystalline floor, forming a cage. Kyogre, ice the walls. Reinforce them. Kyogre unleashed a beam of absolute zero cold, flash freezing the magma-hot rock into a cage of obsidian-like glass. The combined assault, a fusion of elements that should have been impossible, was a testament to their newfound unity. For a moment, Melia was trapped. But she simply smiled, a terrible, pitying expression on her face. You fight to preserve the cage, she whispered, her voice echoing in all their minds. But you are already in it. Your existence is the prison. She looked directly at Ash, her void black eyes seeing past the hall, past the gods, and into the core of him. He wants you to know, little king, that this is all your fault. Every family crushed under the foot of a rampaging god, every town washed away by a careless tide. That is the pain that fuels our master's purpose. He is not your enemy, he is your consequence. And with that, she dissolved. Not in a flash of light, but like smoke, her form unraveling into a wisp of anti-energy that was simply gone. She had escaped, leaving behind only her chilling words and the lingering, poisonous cold of her presence. A profound silence descended upon the hall. The gods looked at each other, the lingering animosity between them extinguished, replaced by a shared, cold dread. They had faced an emissary of their own extinction. One by one, they turned their gaze to Ash. Groudon let out a low, rumbling groan, not of aggression, but of reluctant acknowledgement. Kyogre mirrored the sentiment with a quiet, resonant sonar pulse. Zekrom and Reshiram, the dragons of ideals and truth, dipped their heads in a gesture of assent. They had seen his truth, and they had tested his ideals. He had not been found wanting. Lugia descended, its great, gentle eyes meeting Ash's. Less than you do not command, yet we will follow. You do not rule, yet you will lead. You have shown us the face of the true enemy. We're yours to guide, Nexus King. Greater than. The title settled on him, no longer feeling like a costume, but like a responsibility he had finally, fully accepted. His court was formed. Not of subjects, but of willing, desperate allies. Director Kalen watched the last of the corrupted data feed flicker and die on the main screen in his command center. The probe attached to Melia's uniform had transmitted fragmented, chaotic data packets before it, too, had been unmade. He had seen enough. He had seen the impossible assembly of gods. He had seen Melia's horrifying transformation. And he had seen Ash Ketchum, a 19-year-old boy from a backwater town, standing before a divine host, and he had seen them obey. His meticulously ordered world, a world governed by human logic, strategy, and control, had just been rendered obsolete. His worst fears were dwarfed by the new reality. Ash wasn't a walking nuke anymore. He was a foreign superpower, a new king with an army of gods, who had just established his court in a dimension Kalen couldn't touch, preparing for a war Kalen couldn't comprehend. The order for lethal force was a pathetic joke. You don't shoot a god with a bullet. He sat in the silence for a long time, the only sound the soft hum of the facility's life support. His face was a mask of cold, calculating calm, but inside, a new strategy was being forged in the fires of pure, desperate pragmatism. He couldn't outfight the god. So, he would have to outthink the boy. Power had failed. Politics had failed. It was time for a more personal, a more insidious approach. He opened a secure file on his private server, one labeled Ketchum, a photo of a kind-faced woman with brown hair, standing in front of a small house in Pallet Town, appeared on the screen. His new weapon was not a machine. It was a mother. The message arrived 3 days later. They had established a new, temporary refuge on the secluded island of New Cinnabar, the volcanic heat and magnetic interference providing excellent cover. Ash was in the middle of a session with Annabelle, trying to learn how to gently probe the network of legendary minds without it feeling like a shout. Suddenly, a single, encrypted data packet bypassed all of Cynthia's firewalls and materialized on her pokish screen. It was addressed directly to Ash, from Director Kalen. The message was a masterwork of manipulation. Kalen's face appeared, not in his severe Aegis uniform, but in a simple suit, his expression not of a commander, but of a weary diplomat. Ash Ketchum, the message began, the use of his name a deliberate disarming tactic. I am sending this to you against the protocol of my own organization because I believe we are at a precipice. The events at the Spear Pillar, and the subsequent emergence of other entities, have radicalized a faction within the Aegis Accord. They no longer see containment as a viable option. They are pushing for a global preemptive strike, the UX protocol, which would target not just you, but every known legendary habitat on the planet. They believe the only way to secure humanity is to cage or kill every god. He paused, letting the horrifying image sink in. I do not agree with this. It is brutal, and it is short-sighted. I believe in order, not chaos. I am offering a parley. A truce. A chance for us to de-escalate this before my people do something irreversible. The camera pulled back slightly to show a live feed of his mother, Delia Ketchum. She was not in a cell, but in a comfortable-looking suite, pouring herself a cup of tea. She looked unharmed, but the presence of 2 stoic Aegis guards by the door was an unspoken threat. Your mother has been placed under our protective custody, Kalen said, his voice smooth as silk. The official reason is to shield her from the dangerous energy you now emit. But you and I know the truth. She is my guarantee that you will listen. Come and meet me. Alone. We will negotiate. For her safety, and for the safety of the world. The Indigo Plateau. The old stadium. In 48 hours. Come, and we will find a way out of this madness. If you do not, my hand will be forced. I will lose control of this situation, and the radicals will get their war. The message ended. The room was silent, save for the crackle of Pikachu's cheeks. It's a trap, Cynthia said instantly, her voice flat and cold. The entire premise is flawed. A man in his position doesn't lose control. He is a master of emotional manipulation. Mewtwo's voice echoed in their minds, his form shimmering into view. He had been listening from the shadows. He offers you the guise of a reasonable man to lure you into an unreasonable position. It is a classic human deception. I can't get a read on him, Annabelle said, her eyes closed in concentration, her hand pressed to her temple. His mind is a fortress. It's shielded, polished. I can't feel any truth or any deception. And that terrifies me more than anything. Ash listened to them all. He knew they were right. Every strategic instinct, every lesson he'd ever learned, screamed that it was a trap. But the image of his mother, a pawn in this cosmic chess game, overrode everything. If there's a 1% chance he's telling the truth about the UX protocol, Ash said, his voice quiet but unshakable, I have to take it. And if it's a trap, he looked at his friends, his family. Then it's a trap for me. Not for you. I will not risk any of you. I'm going. Alone. He stood up, his decision made. It was the choice of a king. To bear the burden so others would not have to. 2 days later, Ash stood before the ruins of the Indigo Plateau Stadium. Kalen had chosen the location well. It was a place of ghosts and memories, of his greatest triumphs and bitterest defeats. The iconic arena where he had fought for his dreams was now a wreck, a deliberate psychological blow. He walked through the shattered entrance and into the center of the once pristine battlefield, now overgrown with weeds. The silence was absolute. Kalen. He called out, his voice echoing off the crumbling stands. I'm here, I'm alone. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, a low, powerful hum vibrated up from the ground. With a groaning of stressed metal, massive pylons of dark, polished steel rose from beneath the earth, surrounding the battlefield in a perfect, geometric circle. They sparked to life, a shimmering, golden dome of energy flickering into existence over the stadium, sealing him in. A massive view screen descended from the sky in the center of the field, and Kalen's face appeared, no longer the weary diplomat, but the cold, triumphant commander. Welcome, Ash, Kalen said, his voice booming through the arena. Thank you for your punctuality. Where's my mother? Ash demanded, his hands clenching into fists. She is perfectly safe, and will remain so, Kalen replied smoothly. Unlike you. He gestured, and the camera on his end pulled back, revealing the machine he was standing in front of. It was a massive, terrifying apparatus of spinning gyroscopes and crackling conduits, all centered on a crystalline cage. And inside the cage, writhing in agony, its electrical energy being violently siphoned into the machine, was Zapdos. Allow me to introduce the UX-01, Kalen said, a note of pride in his voice. Though we've repurposed it. I call it the Nexus engine. It's not designed to destroy you. That would be a waste. It's designed to drain you. To bleed the divinity from you, leaving only the manageable, human shell behind. The pylons around Ash began to glow brighter, the hum rising to a deafening shriek. He felt it instantly, a horrifying, magnetic pull on his very soul. The Nexus energy inside him was being drawn out, siphoned away into the pylons. The pain was excruciating, like being pulled apart on a molecular level. The world cannot survive a god, Ash. Kalen's voice thundered over his screams. Humanity cannot be a footnote in the history of gods and monsters. We must be the masters of our own destiny. Your power, your very existence, threatens that sovereignty. I am not a villain. I am a patriot, saving my species from obsolescence. The engine roared to life. Ash cried out, falling to his knees as the energy poured from him, but through his own agony, he felt something else. The pain of Zapdos. The proud, wild, free spirit of the legendary bird of thunder, caged and violated, its life force being used as fuel. The empathy cut through his own suffering. He looked up, his eyes blazing not with the light of the Nexus, but with his own indomitable will. Kalen had made a critical error. He thought Ash was merely a container for the power. He didn't understand that Ash was the power. The bond was absolute. He reached out, not with his hands, but with his mind, pushing through the draining field. He found the terrified, furious consciousness of Zapdos. He didn't send a command. He didn't try to assert his kingship. He sent a single, pure, empathetic thought. A memory of soaring through a thunderstorm on Charizard's back, a feeling of pure, untamed freedom. Less than you were the storm, greater than he sent to the caged bird. Less than you were lightning. You were free. Greater than. Then, he did the last thing Kalen would have ever expected. Instead of fighting the drain, he focused his remaining power, gathered it, and gave it to Zapdos. A massive, voluntary surge of pure, divine creation energy flooded into the legendary bird. Zapdos screamed, a sound not of pain, but of pure, unadulterated power. The siphoning conduits shattered. The crystalline cage exploded outward in a shower of fragments. Overloaded, supercharged, and utterly enraged, Zapdos unleashed a thunderbolt of apocalyptic proportions. The Nexus engine detonated. The pylons overloaded. The energy dome collapsed. the entire Indigo Plateau was plunged into a sudden, silent darkness as a massive electromagnetic pulse blacked out the entire region. In the ensuing chaos, Ash, weakened but resolute, pushed himself to his feet. Through the smoke and the flickering electrical fires, he saw Kalen, staggering out from the wreckage of his control room, his face a mask of utter disbelief. Ash was upon him in an instant. He didn't strike him. He didn't rage. He simply raised a hand, and a gentle, irresistible telekinetic force pinned Kalen to a piece of shattered wall. "It's over, Kalen," Ash said, his voice raspy. "Stop hunting me. Start helping me. The real enemy, the one that made your commander its puppet, is coming for us all." As if on cue, a massive shadow fell over them. The majestic, silver form of Lugia descended from the smoke-filled sky, Cynthia and Annabelle on its back. They had disobeyed his orders. They had come for him. Annabelle slid from Lugia's back before it even landed, running toward him, her face a mess of terror and relief. She saw the blood trickling from his nose, the way he swayed on his feet, and her professional calm shattered completely. "Ash!" she cried, her voice cracking. She threw her arms around him, holding him tightly, as if to physically keep him from falling apart. "I was so scared, I thought I'd lose you." He leaned into her, his strength finally giving out. All this time, she had been his anchor, the calm voice that guided the god. But in this moment, seeing the raw, terrified honesty in her eyes, he realized she was also the anchor for the boy. The one person who was afraid of losing Ash Ketchum, not the Nexus King. He tilted his head down, and in the eerie, flickering light of the burning ruins, he kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of passion or triumph. It was a kiss of desperation, of two people finding a single, solid point of stability in a world that had crumbled around them. It was a quiet, unspoken promise. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Price of Prophecy. The fires in the ruins of the Indigo Plateau burned with a strange, quiet reverence, casting flickering shadows that danced like ghosts of battles past. In the center of the devastated arena, a fragile, impossible truce had formed. Zapdos, its feathers still crackling with residual Nexus energy, perched atop the shattered scoreboard, a wary, electric-eyed gargoyle watching the scene below. Lugia rested nearby, a mountain of silver and white, its serene presence a stark contrast to the destruction. Kalen sat on a piece of rubble, his face illuminated by the flames. He was no longer the composed director, the master manipulator. He was a man who had watched his entire worldview get dismantled by a single, defiant act of empathy. He was their prisoner, but the bars of his cage were the ruins of his own certainty. Ash, leaning against Annabelle for support, his exhaustion a heavy cloak, faced the defeated man. "Melia," Ash's voice was raspy. "What did you do to her? What was she talking about?" Kalen looked up, his gaze distant, haunted. "I didn't do anything to her," he said, his voice hollow. "The world did. And beings like them." He nodded his head toward the two legendary birds. "Melia was my best operative. Fiercely loyal, brilliant, the heart of the Aegis Accord. She believed in our mission. Protecting humanity from the collateral damage of a world filled with gods." He took a slow, shaky breath. Her belief wasn't theoretical. It was born from experience. She was from New Island. The name landed with the weight of a tombstone. Ash felt a phantom chill, a memory of being turned to stone. Beside him, he felt a spike of cold, intellectual fury radiate from Mewtwo, who had just materialized, a silent, grim specter drawn by the psychic fallout of the battle. "She was a child when it happened," Kalen continued, his voice barely a whisper. "During the battle between Mewtwo and Mew. Her family was on a boat just off the coast, a fishing trip. They were caught in the crossfire. Not by a stray hyper beam, but by the raw, psychic backlash of two gods trying to erase each other." He closed his eyes, the memory clearly painful. Her parents, her little brother, they weren't physically harmed. Their minds were just broken. Scoured clean by psychic energies no human was ever meant to endure. They've been empty shells in a Kanto medical facility ever since. Mewtwo flinched as if struck. A low, guttural sound of self-loathing echoed in all their minds. He, the self-proclaimed protector of Pokémon from the cruelty of humans, had inflicted a wound on an innocent family, a wound that had festered into the monster they had just faced. Melia's words from the Hall of Origin now carried a terrible, personal weight. "You fight, and we die." She dedicated her life to preventing that from ever happening again, Kalen said. Looking at his hands, she saw the emergence of Acid Alpha 1. Ash, as the ultimate escalation of that threat. A human with the power to cause that kind of damage with a stray thought. When I chose to try and control you, she saw it as a half measure. She believed the only true path to peace was to eliminate the variable altogether. The gods. The power. All of it. And the silencer found her, Annabelle whispered, the pieces falling into place. It offered her the one thing she wanted more than anything. A world without that pain. A world of perfect, silent peace, Kalen confirmed, his voice cracking. She didn't fall to it. She embraced it. She willingly became its echo. A horrifying, profound guilt settled over Ash. This was the consequence Melia had spoken of. The battles he and his friends had fought, the world-ending threats they had averted, they had never stopped to count the cost to the people caught in the middle. He was now the king of the very forces that had created the villain he was fighting. It was a vicious, damning circle. He wasn't just their leader, as Kalen had said, he was their consequence. The weight of that responsibility was heavier than the power of the Nexus itself. We have to find her, Ash said, his voice thick with a new, grim resolve. We have to stop this. How? Cynthia asked, her strategic mind clicking back into gear. She can appear and disappear at will. She's a ghost. No ghost is without a shadow. Mewtwo's voice cut in, his own guilt transmuting into cold, analytical fury. Her bond with the void, as powerful as it is still anchored to her human psyche. Her pain. Her memories. It is a psychic signature. A discordant frequency of grief in the universal spectrum. He turned his glowing eyes to Annabelle. You felt the void song in Alto Mare. I can amplify your senses. Together, we may be able to triangulate her. Annabelle nodded, her expression determined. She closed her eyes, and Mewtwo floated before her, placing a three-fingered hand on her forehead. Their combined psychic power flared, a visible ripple in the air. The world fell away, and they dove into the cosmic sea of consciousness. They searched not for an energy signature, but for a feeling. The unique, soul-deep wound of Melia's loss. They found it. A pinprick of cold, desolate sorrow, resonating from the northern mountains of Kanto. But it wasn't just a location, it was a target. The Tree of Beginning, Annabelle gasped, her eyes flying open. It's a place of immense life force, a focal point for the planet's aura. She's not trying to destroy a city, Ash realized with dawning horror. She's trying to poison the well. Mewtwo's form grew rigid. Mew, he breathed, the name a curse and a prayer. The genetic ancestor. If she corrupts Mew, she could spread the silencer's infection through the very lifeblood of the Pokémon world. Not just apathy. Extinction. The stakes had just escalated from global security to a potential planetary-level extinction event. There was no more time for debate. Lugia carried them, a silver streak against the night sky, their guilt and determination a heavy weight in the air. They flew toward the Kanto mainland, a silent, grim procession. Kalen, now a reluctant passenger, guided them with precise coordinates, his tactical knowledge now repurposed for a new, infinitely more important war. They arrived to find the area around the colossal, rock-like Tree of Beginning already sickening. The symbiotic, crystal-like formations that pulsed with the tree's life force were no longer glowing with a warm, pink light. They were a dull, cancerous gray, emitting a faint, chilling hum of despair, the void song. They ventured inside, the tree's internal passages, usually teeming with life, eerily silent. They found Melia in the heart of the tree, a vast cavern where a river of pure, glowing life energy flowed. She was floating before the central crystal, her back to them. Trapped within a cage of shimmering, black anti-energy was the small, pink, terrified form of Mew. It beat its tiny paws against the bars of its prison, its psychic cries for help silenced by the void. Melia was humming, a soft, tuneless, heartbreaking lullaby as she slowly siphoned the life force from the tree, twisting it into a corrupted, grayish energy, and feeding it into Mew's prison. Please, stop, Ash said, his voice echoing in the cavern. Melia turned, her void black eyes devoid of surprise. The little king arrives, with his court of broken gods and repentant monsters, she said, her voice a soft, dead thing. She gestured to Mewtwo. Do you remember them? The family on the boat? I do. I remember the sound my mother made. A soft little sigh, as everything that made her her was wiped away. Do you know how loud that silence is? Mewtwo could not answer. The guilt was a physical presence, choking him. I'm sorry, Ash said, the words feeling pathetic, hopelessly inadequate. For what happened to you. For our part in it, it was wrong. Wrong is a child's word, Melia scoffed. It was a data point. Proof of a flawed system. A universe built on pain is a failed experiment. I am just helping to shut it down. She raised a hand, and a wave of pure despair, the concentrated void song, washed over them. It was a psychic attack far more powerful than the one at Alto Mare. It didn't just suggest apathy. It forced it, showing them visions of their own greatest failures, of every battle lost, every friend they couldn't save. But this time, they were ready. Annabelle and Mewtwo created a psychic shield, not of defiance, but of acceptance. They didn't block the pain. They acknowledged it, processed it, and endured it. And Ash was the anchor. He broadcast his own countersong, not just of hope and love, but of regret. Of atonement. Of the promise to be better. The wave of despair washed over them and broke, a tide against a steadfast shore. Melia's expression flickered for the first time. She saw them standing, not as gods, but as flawed, resilient beings, defined not by their power, but by their refusal to surrender to their own pain. Ash took a step forward, his hands open, his expression one of profound, aching empathy. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't summon his power. He spoke to the broken woman inside the monster. Don't let that be the end of their story, he said, his voice soft. Don't let the last thing they created in this world be more pain. Help me make it right. Help me build a world where no other family has to feel what you felt. A world where the gods are held accountable. A world where we protect the innocent. Your pain, it doesn't have to be a weapon. It can be a shield. Help us build it. He was offering her not a battle, but a purpose. Atonement. A way to give her family's suffering meaning beyond destruction. For a single, heart-stopping moment, the void in Melia's eyes wavered. A flicker of the woman she had been. A glint of tears. A spasm of conflict. The human inside the echo was fighting back. She looked at Ash, at his outstretched hand, and her lips parted, as if to speak. Before she could, her body went rigid. A look of profound surprise crossed her features. The silencer, a being of pure, dispassionate logic, had made its judgment. An instrument that hesitates is a flawed instrument. A weapon that feels doubt is a broken one. From within, the anti-energy turned on its host. There was no scream. No final words. Commander Melia, the echo of the void, simply crumbled. Her form dissolved into a shower of fine, gray dust that drifted to the floor, leaving nothing behind. The black cage around Mew shattered, and the little Pokémon, freed, zipped straight into Ash's arms, trembling. The silence that followed was absolute. They had won, but it felt like a terrible, profound loss. Ash stood there, holding the ancestor of all Pokémon, his offer of redemption turned to dust in his hands. A new feeling crystallized within him, displacing the guilt and the sorrow. A cold, hard, righteous fury. His anger was not for Melia. It was for the cruel, dispassionate it that had used her pain and discarded her when she showed a flicker of humanity. He had tried to be a diplomat. He had tried to be a healer. Now, he understood. You don't negotiate with a plague. You eradicate it. He looked at his friends, at the silent, grieving Mewtwo, at the shaken but resolute faces of Cynthia and Annabelle. He looked at Kalen, who stared at the spot where Melia had vanished, his face a mask of tragedy. Ash made a silent vow, a decree that echoed through the Nexus to every legendary Pokémon now allied with him. No more. No more collateral damage. No more carelessness. We protect them. All of them. Or we do not deserve this power. It was his first, true decree as their king. Kalen finally looked up, his eyes meeting Ash's. The war between them was over. He had seen the true face of the enemy, and he had seen the true character of the boy he had hunted. He surreptitiously activated a secure, encrypted comm link in his watch. This is Director Kalen, authorization code Omega-0, he whispered, turning away from the group. To all Aegis Sector commanders loyal to the original charter. The Kalen contingency is now active. Director Melia is confirmed Kia, compromised by a hostile, extra-dimensional entity. Asset Alpha 1 is reclassified. He is not our enemy. He is our only hope. Assemble at the rendezvous point. We have a new war to fight. A new alliance was being forged in the heart of the world, born from a shared tragedy. The battle for Melia's soul had been lost, but the battle for the worlds was just beginning. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Silencer's shadow. The truce born from the ashes of the Indigo Plateau was a fragile, desperate thing. Kalen, stripped of his hubris, had become their most unlikely and invaluable asset. Working from a mobile command center, a repurposed Aegis stealth freighter hidden in the deep sea trenches off the coast of Hoenn, he and Cynthia orchestrated a new, secret war. The world did not know that the Aegis Accord had fractured, that its charismatic director was now collaborating with the very threat he had sworn to contain. To the public, Ash Ketchum was still a fugitive. But in the shadows, an alliance of humanity and gods was preparing for the end of the world. For Ash, the days that followed were a blur of grim purpose. The guilt over Melia was a constant, dull ache, a ghost that sat beside the divine hum in his mind. He had made a decree to his new court, and he intended to keep it. He and his retinue of legendaries, Lugia, Mewtwo, Latios, and Latios forming his core rapid response team, became global guardians. When a nascent typhoon threatened a coastal city, Kyogre, guided by Ash's empathic link, would gently dissipate its energy. When a seismic tremor shook a mountain range, Groudon would reinforce the tectonic plates. They were no longer wild, primal forces. They were becoming a conscious, planetary immune system. It was a quiet, profound revolution, unseen by the world, but it was not to last. The enemy they faced was not a force of nature, it was a force against nature. It began subtly. A strange, persistent haze in the upper atmosphere that baffled meteorologists. A fractional dimming of the sun that astronomers couldn't explain. Then came the feeling. A vague, collective melancholy that settled over the planet like a fine dust. People felt a little more tired. Colors seemed a little less vibrant. Laughter felt a little more forced. It was a creeping, spiritual ennui that had no source and no cure. Kalen's analysts were the first to see the pattern. It's not an energy phenomenon, he reported to them, his face a grim, holographic projection in their underwater base. It's not psychic, not atmospheric. All our instruments read normal. But the data, Ash, the data is what's terrifying. He brought up a chart. Global birth rates, down 5% in a week. Global productivity, down 10. Spontaneous recovery rates in hospitals, down 12. It's like the planet is giving up. The very statistical probability of positive outcomes is decreasing. Life is losing its momentum. Ash didn't need the data. He could feel it. The divine symphony in his head was becoming muted, the vibrant voices of the legendaries tinged with a strange lethargy. It was a new song, a sub-psychic drone that hummed beneath everything else. The Void Song was no longer a targeted weapon. It had gone global. The slow decline accelerated into a terrifying, silent collapse. Within a week, the shadow was no longer a feeling, it was a presence. A metaphysical stain that was spreading across the globe. In the great, bustling cities of the world, a profound quiet fell. People went through the motions of their lives, but the spark was gone. The silence of Alto Mare was now the silence of the world. For the Pokémon, it was a catastrophe. The very essence of their being, their spirit, their drive to grow, to battle, to evolve, was being drained away. They retreated into their Pokéballs, not out of fear, but out of a deep, sorrowful apathy. The effect on the legendaries was the most horrific of all. They were beings of pure concept, living embodiments of the world's fundamental forces. And those forces were being silenced. Ash felt it through the Nexus, a series of agonizing, psychic death rattles. He felt Groudon's internal magma cooling, its mighty form growing brittle and sluggish. He felt Kyogre's command over the tides weaken, its body becoming still, its great mind clouded with a torpor that bordered on hibernation. On the Rainbow Wing throne, Ho-Oh's vibrant, iridescent feathers began to fade, turning the color of ash and dust. The gods were being unplugged from the universe. They were dying a slow, spiritual death, and they were terrified. In the midst of this universal fading, Ash was an anomaly. The nexus of origin within his chest was a furnace of pure creation, a wellspring of life and chaotic, defiant energy. The Silencer's song was a whisper of absolute negation, an argument for the peace of non-existence. The nexus was a constant, roaring rebuttal. It made him a beacon, the last burning candle in a world being plunged into darkness. Where he stood, the shadow receded. His presence was a shield, his will a weapon. "It's not enough," he said, his voice raw, looking at the holographic map of the spreading blight. They were huddled in the command center of the freighter. Ash, Annabelle, Cynthia, and Kalen. "I can protect this ship. I can protect a single island. I can't protect the whole world just by standing here." "Then we go to the source," Mewtwo's voice echoed, his form materializing in the center of the room. The psychic Pokémon was visibly strained, a faint tremor in his powerful hands. Even his immense, disciplined mind was struggling against the ceaseless drone of despair. This is not a battle to be won with defense. It is a poison that must be neutralized at its heart. "But how do we fight it?" Cynthia asked, her usual strategic confidence shaken. "We can't punch a concept. We can't command a shadow to retreat." "We won't have to," Annabelle said, her voice quiet but firm. She looked at Ash, her eyes filled with a faith that was absolute. "Ash is the counter-agent. If we can get him to the source of the infection, the Nexus can do what it did in Alto Mare. It can heal the wound." It was a desperate, impossible plan, but it was the only one they had. They would assemble a small, powerful escort. The few legendaries who still had the strength and mental fortitude to resist the deepest despair. Mewtwo and Lugia, their psychic abilities offering a natural defense. And the creation trio, Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina. Summoned from their dimensions, their control over the fundamental laws of reality their greatest asset. While they prepared to strike at the heart of the shadow, Cynthia and Kalen initiated the last, desperate defense of humanity. The Kalen contingency. Using every Pokémon Center, every broadcast tower, every satellite in their secretly commandeered network, they began to fight the silence with noise. It wasn't a psychic broadcast, but an emotional one. They flooded the global airwaves with a carefully curated stream of content designed to affirm life. Symphonies that soared with defiant joy, the laughter of children, the cries of newborn babies. Videos of a Charmander's tail igniting for the first time, of a Magikarp evolving into a glorious Gyarados, of trainers weeping with joy as they won their first badges. They weaponized hope, firing a billion small, defiant sparks of light into the encroaching darkness. It wouldn't stop the shadow, but they prayed it would slow it down. It was humanity's last stand, a final, desperate song against the dying of the light. Their journey to the source was a flight through a graveyard. Borne on the back of a shimmering, ghostly Palkia who warped space to carry them, they traveled toward the growing epicenter of the blight. The world below them was a world of gray. The once vibrant greens of the forests were muted. The brilliant blues of the oceans were dull and lifeless. The sprawling, glittering cities were silent. The void song grew stronger with every mile, a crushing, psychic pressure that promised the sweet release of surrender. The legendaries flew in a protective formation around Palkia, a grim, divine phalanx. But they were faltering. Ash could feel their strength waning, their minds buckling under the strain. Dialga's command of time was stuttering. Giratina's shadowy form seemed thin, less substantial. Annabelle was their shield. She sat behind Ash, her hands on his shoulders, her eyes closed in a state of profound concentration. She drew on the raw, positive energy radiating from the Nexus and wove it into a psychic barrier, a bubble of defiant hope that enveloped their entire escort. She was holding back the ocean, and the effort was bleeding her pale, a thin trickle of blood appearing beneath her nose. Ash reached back, his hand closing over hers. "Annabelle, you have to stop. It's killing you." "If I stop, we lose them," she sent to him, her mental voice strained but unbroken. "And if we lose them, we lose everything. I can hold it. Just keep being you. Keep burning. You're our light." They finally found it. Not on the planet's surface, but high above it, in the silent, frozen expanse of the mesosphere, directly over the peak of Mount Coronet. It was a wound. A vast, silent, shimmering tear in the fabric of reality itself. It was a blackness that was not the absence of light, but the presence of a vast and terrible other. It looked into the silencer's domain, a realm of perfect, starless, silent non-existence. The shadow that was bleeding across the world was a literal miasma of despair seeping from this cosmic injury. As they approached, the sub-psychic drone coalesced into a voice. It was not a sound. It was an impartation of pure, undeniable, and devastating truth that bloomed simultaneously in all of their minds. "Less than cease. Greater than the voice was calm. It was logical. It was utterly without malice. It was the voice of a physician explaining a terminal diagnosis. Less than you struggle. You fight. You love. You hope. These are but the chaotic, temporary firings of organic chemistry. A brief, feverish dream in a dying universe. Greater than. It showed them images. Not illusions, but facts. It showed them the inevitable heat death of the universe, the final, cold silence as the last star extinguished. It showed them the decay of all bonds, the erosion of all memory, the ultimate futility of every action they had ever taken. Less than your greatest victories are but ripples in a pond, destined to fade. Your deepest loves are but fleeting warmth before the eternal cold. Your existence is a brief, noisy error in a cosmos that trends toward perfect, silent equilibrium. Why prolong the fever? Why endure the pain of the struggle? Surrender. Cease, and be at peace. Greater than. It was not an attack, it was an argument, and it was flawless. The legendaries faltered. Their will, their very reason for being, was being deconstructed by pure, inescapable logic. Dialga's roar of time died in its throat. What was time, but a measure of decay? Palkia's control over space wavered. What was space, but the empty vessel for that decay? Giratina, the master of the antimatter that balanced creation, felt its purpose rendered meaningless. Their lights began to fade. The gods were giving up. Annabelle cried out, the psychic backlash of their despair shattering her shield. She slumped forward, her consciousness overwhelmed, saved only by Ash's arm catching her. Now, only he was left. The voice of the silencer focused on him, the boy who was its antithesis. Less than in you, little king. The nexus of the error. You feel it most of all, do you not? The pain of others. The weight of a universe. You offer them hope, but it is a false promise. A lie you tell them to keep the struggle going. Lay down your burden. Let the noise fade. Let there be silence. Greater than. Ash stood on Palkia's back, the cold of the void before him, the weight of a dying world behind him. The silencer's logic was a perfect, diamond-hard prison, and he was trapped within it. Everything it said was true. In the end, all things faded. All things ended. Pikachu, sensing his partner's despair, crawled from his shoulder to his lap, nudging his chin, a small, worried sound in his throat. Ash looked down at his oldest friend. He looked at the unconscious form of Annabelle in his arms. The silencer's logic was perfect. But it had made one critical, fatal miscalculation. It had assumed the point of the story was the ending. Ash held Annabelle closer. He looked at the tear in reality, at the absolute nothingness beyond, and for the first time, he smiled. He raised his head, and he projected his own thought back at the voice, a single, defiant truth that was his and his alone. Less than you're right. It all ends, but it's not the end that matters. It's the moments. The noise. The light. And I'm going to make sure we get a few more of them before the quiet comes. Greater than. He stood before the end of all things, the last light of hope in a dying universe, anchored by a love that defied all logic and prepared to fight. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The King's First Decree. The silencer's logic was a perfect cage of despair, and for a moment, Ash stood within it, the weight of its truth pressing down on him. The universe would end. All would be silence. It was inevitable. But as he looked down at Pikachu, a small, warm, defiant spark of life in his arms, and felt the faint, steady pulse of the unconscious Annabelle beside him, he realized the silencer had missed the point. A story wasn't beautiful because it lasted forever. It was beautiful because it happened at all. His smile, small and tired, was an act of rebellion more profound than any display of power. His projected thought, a quiet rebuttal against the storm of logic, was a declaration of war. The silencer, for the first time, seemed to falter. Its perfect, logical argument had been met with an illogical, emotional truth it could not compute. The voice fell silent, but the wound in reality remained, a gaping maw of non-existence, its presence a constant, lethal poison. From the faltering gods around him, a new resolve began to burn. Ash's defiance was a spark thrown into dry tinder. Mewtwo was the first to recover, his own complex, tormented mind finding an anchor in the simple, stubborn loyalty of the boy he had once scorned. The premise is flawed, Mewtwo's mental voice boomed, no longer aimed at Ash, but at the wound itself, a philosopher accepting a debate. It assumes that a finite existence is a meaningless one. This is a failure of imagination. As if in response, a new wave of anti-energy pulsed from the wound, taking the form of shimmering, geometric shards of pure despair that shot toward them. Dialga. Palkia. Giratina. Ash's voice rang with command, not of a king to his subjects, but of a comrade to his friends. Buy me time. The three gods of creation, their strength renewed by his will, moved as one. Dialga roared, and the shards of despair slowed, trapped in a bubble of distorted time. Palkia twisted the space around them, forcing them into harmless, looping trajectories. Giratina emerged from its reverse dimension, its shadowy wings shielding the others from the worst of the negating energy. They were not destroying the attacks, they were managing them, a desperate, divine triage. Ash knew they couldn't hold forever. He had to act. He turned to the wound, the source of it all, and unleashed the power of the Nexus. A torrent of pure, iridescent creation energy, a firehose of life itself, shot from his outstretched hands and slammed into the tear in reality. He was going to patch the hole with pure existence. But the wound did not shrink, it did not close, it drank. The energy vanished into the blackness without a trace, a river pouring into a bottomless ocean. The silencer was not a thing to be overwhelmed. It was the concept of the void, and the void was infinite. He was trying to fill infinity, and it was draining him for nothing. The horrified realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. He couldn't win. Not like this. He stopped, panting, the light from his hands fading. He looked at the tear, at its edges. It was a wound. A rip in the fabric of the world. And you don't mend a tear by throwing thread at it from a distance. You have to get close. You have to stitch it from both sides. From the other side. The thought was so simple, so insane, and so absolutely, terrifyingly right. His power wasn't a weapon meant to destroy the void. It was a tool. A needle and thread. He couldn't close the wound from the outside. He had to go in. At that moment, as if his very realization had stirred her, Annabelle awoke with a gasp. She was still weak, but her psychic senses were screaming, flooded with the sheer, suicidal certainty of his plan. Ash, no, she whispered, her voice cracking as she struggled to sit up. She grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. No, you can't. It will unmake you. There will be nothing left. He turned to look at her, his face strangely calm. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound, heartbreaking clarity. He reached up and gently wiped the trickle of dried blood from her lip with his thumb. When I first got this power, he said, his voice soft, I thought it made me a king. He shook his head. Then I thought it made me a monster. Then a guardian. He looked from her terrified, beautiful eyes to the wound, and then back again. I was wrong. It doesn't make me anything. He brought his other hand up to cup her cheek. It's a shield. That's all. Something you put between the people you love and the thing that wants to hurt them. I'm not a king, Annabelle. I'm a shield. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. A shield that breaks, she choked out. Maybe, he admitted with a sad smile, but it'll be one hell of a block. He leaned in and kissed her. It was a kiss that tasted of ozone and salt, of desperation and a love that had been forged in the heart of a cosmic storm. It was a kiss that said everything he didn't have the words for. I'm sorry. Thank you. Live. Remember us. He pulled back, and with a gesture that felt more significant than any divine act he had performed, he took off his worn, iconic hat and placed it in her hands. Keep this for me, he said. He turned to the others. To Cynthia, her face a mask of stoic, heartbroken pride. To the faltering legendaries, who were fighting for him, for their world. To Mewtwo, who met his gaze with a look of profound, grudging respect. And to Pikachu, who was now on his feet on Palkia's back, cheeks sparking, ready for a fight he couldn't win. Pikachu, stay with her, Ash said, his voice firm. He gave his oldest friend one last, sad smile. Keep them safe until I get back. Pikachu cried out, a desperate, protesting wail, but he understood the finality in his partner's voice. Ash turned his back on them all and faced the void. He closed his eyes and took one last, deep breath, not of air, but of the feeling of his friends behind him, the feeling of the world he was about to leave. Then he let go. He opened the floodgates of the Nexus, unleashing its full, unbridled power. His body became a living star, a being of pure, incandescent creation energy. The 17 type plates manifested around him, not as physical objects, but as orbiting constellations of divine law. He was a symphony of existence, a furious, beautiful argument against the silence. And with a final, silent farewell, he dove headfirst into the wound. From the outside, the effect was immediate and absolute. As Ash's light vanished into the infinite blackness, the wound began to change. The edges of the tear, which had been bleeding despair into their reality, suddenly stopped. They began to pull together, not closing, but sealing. A new substance was forming where the void had been, a shimmering, crystalline material that seemed to be woven from solidified light and frozen time. The black, gaping maw was being stitched shut from the inside. The shadow across the world vanished as if it had never been. A collective, planetary gasp of relief echoed through the psychic sphere. The sun seemed to shine brighter. The colors of the world rushed back, more vibrant than before. The divine hum in the minds of the legendaries returned, a song of renewed, triumphant life. They had won. The silencer was gone, its connection to their world severed. But so was Ash. The wound was no more. In its place, high in the Earth's atmosphere, hung a new, impossible celestial body. A beautiful, terrible scar. A solid, crystalline sphere that shimmered with a faint, internal, multicolored light. It was a monument to his sacrifice. The origin seal. The remaining legendaries, their strength returned, stared at the seal in silent, reverent awe. Mewtwo floated closer to it, his hand outstretched as if to touch it. He could feel no life, no consciousness. Only a vast, sealed, and final power. He sacrificed himself. Mewtwo's voice was a whisper in the minds of the others, stripped of all its arrogance, filled only with a profound, aching sorrow. For us all. 1 month later. The world was healing. The silence was a memory, a nightmare from which everyone was slowly, collectively waking. The Aegis Accord, under the new, unified leadership of Kalen and Cynthia, was secretly working with the legendaries, repairing the damage to the planet. A quiet, unheralded partnership of gods and mortals. The world did not know the name of its savior. They only knew that the strange, sad haze had lifted. Annabelle stood on the peak of Mount Coronet, at the spear pillar, the place where it had all begun. The biting wind whipped at her hair, but she didn't seem to feel the cold. In her hands, she clutched a worn, red and white hat. Beside her, Pikachu sat, his gaze fixed on the sky. High above, even in the bright light of day, the origin seal was visible. A faint, shimmering star that wasn't a star. A promise and a tomb. She came here every day, to watch, to remember, to hope. The others told her to move on, that he was gone, that his sacrifice was final. But she couldn't. The anchor of her soul was on the other side of that crystal wall, and she could still feel the phantom pull. She closed her eyes, tears threatening to freeze on her cheeks. Ash, she whispered to the wind. I miss you. She felt a faint, psychic spark. So faint, she thought she had imagined it. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't a thought. It was more like an echo. A flicker of warmth from a star a million light years away. It brushed against her mind, and in it, she felt a single, unmistakable impression. Not a word, but a feeling. A question. A familiar, hopeful concern. Pikachu? Her eyes snapped open, she looked down. Pikachu's head was cocked, his ears twitching. His cheeks began to spark, a low, hopeful crackle in the thin mountain air. He stared intently at the origin seal, a low, happy shaw rumbling in his chest. Annabelle's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked from Pikachu back to the shimmering crystal scar in the sky. He wasn't gone. He was trapped. He was fighting. He was still in there, holding back the infinite silence with nothing but his own stubborn, indomitable will. A real, true smile, the first in a month, spread across her face, chasing away the shadows. Hope, defiant and illogical, surged through her. The war was not over. It had just entered its next stage. Chapter 10 end.